Hi guys, and welcome to Anunnaki Sanctuary's channel. Tonight we slip into a dawn so old it still smells like wet clay and river reeds, where the sky is not a background, but a boss. You are standing on the edge of Sumer, where the Tigris and Euphrates breathe fog across fields, and every gust of wind feels like it has an opinion about your life choices. Somewhere out there, a temple bell does not ring yet, because bells are a later problem. But you still feel the pull of ritual in the way people move. You probably won't survive this, in the sense that your modern brain is going to panic without Wi-Fi, iced coffee, or a weather app to warn you about divine mood swings. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments, because I love knowing where the night is listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk forward anyway, barefoot in your imagination, because sandals are precious and the mud is not politely waiting for your convenience. The air is cool and it tastes faintly of silt, fish, and smoke from breakfast fires. The first people you pass do not stare at the sky the way tourists do. They glance up like employees checking whether the manager is watching. For them, the sky has rules, the sky has a voice, and that voice, in this place and time, is often called Enlil. You do not meet Enlil the way you meet a character in a story with a dramatic entrance and a spotlight. You feel him first. A wind slides through the reeds, and it is not just wind. It is permission, warning, order, and consequence, all at once. Enlil is the lord of air and storms in Sumerian tradition, a chief power who can grant kingship, topple it, bless crops, or flatten them like they owe him money. If you are searching for a neat category like god of weather, you are going to be slightly disappointed, because Enlil is also the god of authority, decrees, and the invisible structure that makes a city behave. He is the idea that the world is not random, even when it absolutely looks random. You keep moving toward a low cluster of mud brick houses, and the sound of life thickens around you. A child laughs. A donkey complains. Someone grinds grain with the steady rhythm of a tired planet. And in the middle of it all, there is a constant, quiet bargaining with unseen powers. A woman tosses a pinch of flour into the air, not because she is wasteful, but because she is practical. If the wind is Enlil's breath, then feeding the breath is like paying a small fee to keep the door from slamming. Ancient religion can look poetic from a distance, but up close, it is also logistics, like running a household where the roof might argue with you. Here is one mainstream historical fact that anchors you. In the world of early Mesopotamia, Enlil becomes one of the most important gods in the Sumerian Pantheon, and his cult center is Nippur, a city that functions as a major religious hub even when political power shifts between rival city-states. You will hear that name again and again, like a heartbeat under the whole region. Nippur is not always the place with the biggest army, but it is the place with the biggest spiritual paperwork, and yes, that is a joke, but also not really. Clay tablets are everywhere, and you are about to learn that the ancient world runs on administration the way your phone runs on battery. Except the battery is baked mud and the charger is a guy with a reed stylus. You pause at the edge of a field where barley bends in the breeze. The wind brushes your face, and you suddenly understand why breath becomes such a powerful metaphor here. Air is invisible, but it moves everything. It is intimate, inside your lungs, and it is vast, pushing storms across flat land with nothing to stop them. Enlil's law feels like that. Not a list you read, but a force you live under. People speak of divine decrees, and in later stories you will hear about the Tablet of Destinies, a legendary object that grants whoever holds it the authority to set fates and commands. It is a quirky tidbit, half myth and half political metaphor, like imagining the universe has a master clipboard and Enlil is the one who signs off on the schedule. You look at the horizon and try to picture what law means before thick law codes are carved into stone. It is not courtroom drama. It is cosmic expectation. The rivers should flood at the right time. The king should perform the right rituals. The temple should distribute grain fairly, or at least fairly enough that no one starts throwing bricks. Enlil's law is the belief that order is real, and that disorder has a name, a cause, and usually a punishment. And because you are you cannot help thinking, wow, the sky really is doing a lot of management work. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a tiny voice says, this is why we invented calendars. And another tiny voice says, and anxiety. As you drift closer to the center of settlement, you catch fragments of speech. People do not gossip only about neighbors. They gossip about omens. A strange cloud, a dog howling at noon, a sudden gust knocking over a pot. It is not that everyone is superstitious in a cartoonish way. It is that they live in a landscape where disaster can come fast, and meaning is a survival tool. If a storm destroys your crop, you want an explanation that gives you a handle, even if the handle is ritual. Enlil becomes that handle. If the wind is angry, maybe you can soothe it. If the sky is issuing a decree, maybe you can comply. Historians still argue whether Enlil's rise to supreme status is mainly a reflection of older storm worship that naturally commanded fear in the plains, or whether it is partly the result of Nippur's priestly influence shaping theology to match their city's prestige. You can feel both possibilities in the air. Storms are real here, and so is politics. Temples are not just spiritual centers. They are economic engines, storehouses, employers, and storytellers. When a temple speaks, it speaks with grain behind its words. You step into a small open space where a few men are smoothing clay. They are making tablets, and you cannot help smiling at how normal it looks. Like someone prepping notebooks for a new school year. One of them presses a cylinder seal into wet clay and lifts it, leaving a tiny rolling scene of figures and symbols. This is identity, authorization, and maybe a little bragging, all in one stamp. If you ever wanted proof that bureaucracy is timeless, here it is, fresh and squishy in your hands. You imagine Enlil watching this and nodding like, yes, document it. And you laugh softly, because even the sky god apparently appreciates good record keeping. A priest passes by, shoulders squared, hair carefully arranged, eyes half-lidded the way people look when they are listening to something you cannot hear. He does not announce Enlil with trumpets. He carries Enlil like a posture. He murmurs a few words, and you catch a rhythm, a formal cadence, as if the language itself is being trained to sound like authority. In later hymns, Enlil is praised as the one whose word is firm, whose command cannot be overturned. That idea is soothing and terrifying at the same time. It is soothing because it promises stability. It is terrifying because it means you cannot negotiate with the wind the way you negotiate with your neighbor. And then, just to keep you humble, a stronger gust snaps through, scattering dust, and you flinch like a person who still thinks they are the center of the universe. The locals barely react. They adjust their baskets, tighten a rope, pull a child closer, and continue. This is the first lesson Enlil teaches you without saying a word. Law is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the way everyone learns to move, in the quiet that follows. Your mind wanders into one of those modern fringe corridors that people love. Some later enthusiasts will point at the name Anunnaki, at tales of divine assemblies and sky authority, and insist Enlil is not a god at all, but something else entirely. Something that came down from above with rules and technology. You let that idea drift past like a leaf on water. It is a fascinating mirror. More about modern hunger for cosmic explanations than about the clay streets under your feet. Still, you file it away, because myths are living things, and people keep trying to rehome them in whatever era feels most believable. For now, you stay here in the soft dawn, where the real miracle is that thousands of years ago, people already wrestle with the same basic question you do: who gets to decide what is right, what is allowed, what is safe? In Sumer, the answer is not purely human. It is written in wind, spoken through temples, and carried into the lives of farmers and kings alike. Enlil is not just the storm. He is the rule behind the storm, the idea that the sky can make demands. You take one more breath, and the air feels thick with meaning. Ahead, somewhere beyond the fields and canals, the name Nipper waits like a destination you have not earned yet. You keep walking toward it, following the invisible line where breath becomes command, and command becomes the shape of a civilization. You keep walking. And it is funny how quickly your modern sense of distance gives up out here. There are no street signs, no "you are here" maps. Just canals that glint like knives in the sunrise, footpaths packed down by generations of ankles, and that low, steady awareness that the sky is watching your posture. The wind is gentler now, as if Enlil has decided you are not worth smiting today, which is honestly a win. You cross a narrow bridge of reeds and wood that flexes under your weight, and for one sleepy second, you imagine a safety inspector appearing out of thin air to shut the whole thing down. Then you remember, the safety inspector is the river, and it has no clipboard, only consequences. The landscape opens into a wider plain. Far ahead, you begin to see it, a city that does not look like a city in the way your brain expects. No towering skyline, no glass, no neon, just an irregular rise of earth and mud brick, layers upon layers, like a cake made by someone who only owns one ingredient. That rise is not just architecture. It is time piled up. People build, rebuild, collapse, rebuild again. And the ground itself becomes a history book with no page numbers. Somewhere within that layered hump sits Nippur, the quiet heartbeat of Enlil's world. As you approach, the sound changes first. The wind carries voices, then the clack of tools, then the softer hush of ritual spaces, where even footsteps behave. You smell baked bread, animal dung, damp earth, and incense that tries very hard to make the whole place feel less like a busy farm settlement. The city gate is not a grand stone arch like in later empires. It is practical. It is guarded in the way a household is guarded. Less military checkpoint and more, who are you and why are you here? You lower your gaze a little, because the easiest way to survive ancient cities is to look politely non-threatening, which is also my advice for modern subway platforms. Honestly, inside, Nippur feels different from the other settlements you have drifted through in your mind. There is a calm focus here. Like everyone has a shared appointment. People move toward the temple district with purpose. Even the merchants seem to speak a little softer. You get the sense that the city's power is not loud. It is seated. It sits in the way a judge sits, not needing to flex, because everyone already agrees to the rules of the room. Mainstream historical fact time, tucked into your walk like a warm stone in your pocket. Nippur is known in the ancient Near East as a major religious center dedicated to Enlil, and its central temple complex, the Ikka, becomes one of the most important sanctuaries in Mesopotamia. Even when political dominance shifts between city-states like Uruk, Kish, or later imperial powers, control of Nippur and recognition from its priesthood matters for legitimacy. In other words, you can have an army, but if Nippur doesn't nod at you, your crown feels a little like a costume. You follow a processional street that curves gently, and you realize it is designed to guide bodies and attention. The street is not just a road, it is choreography. There are drainage channels along the edges, because even holy places have to deal with rainwater and, let's be real, a lot of spilled beer. Your eyes keep getting pulled upward, not to a skyscraper, but to a rising platform ahead, where the temple precinct begins. The buildings there are larger, cleaner, more carefully maintained. The walls are plastered and whitewashed. Sunlight bounces off them, making the space feel brighter, more controlled, like the city is trying to imitate the clarity of the sky. The closer you get, the more you notice small acts of deference. People straighten their clothing, they adjust hair, they rinse hands at a basin. It is not superstition in the cheap sense. It is social technology. It aligns everyone into the same mental state, respectful, cautious, ready to be observed by both humans and gods. The temple is a place where Enlil's breath is believed to condense into instructions. And here comes the quirky tidbit, drifting in like an odd little feather. In Sumerian religious imagination, the Akur is sometimes described not just as a building, but as a cosmic mountain house, a kind of axis point where heaven and earth connect, even though the surrounding landscape is mostly flat. So humans build height. They stack mud brick into platforms, terraces, later ziggurats. Because if the world does not provide a mountain, you manufacture one. It is like telling the universe, "Excuse me, we made you a staircase." You can almost hear Enlil, the Lord of Air, approving of anything that gives wind a better viewpoint. You enter the outer precinct, and the noise drops, not silence, but a curated quiet. You hear water trickling in a channel. You hear a distant chant that is half music, half memorized obligation. The air smells stronger of incense. Resins burn to make the invisible feel present. A priest walks past carrying a small bowl, eyes fixed on a point ahead as if he is following a line only he can see. You watch him and realize something important. This place runs on specialists, people whose full-time job is to interpret the sky's mood, translate it into rituals, and keep the city's relationship with Enlil stable. You drift near a courtyard where scribes sit, legs tucked, clay tablets on their laps like sleepy pets. They press reeds into wet clay with quick, practiced motions. It is not romantic writing. It is accounting, inventories, lists of offerings, records of labor. And yet, it feels sacred here, because documentation is part of devotion. If Enlil is law, then writing is the way law becomes visible. You imagine a scribe looking up at a gust of wind and thinking, "I should record that." And then you realize, with a tiny chill, that they probably do. Omens, unusual events, patterns. The temple is a place where the world is observed, sorted and archived. Historians still argue whether Nippur's religious authority is primarily the result of deep tradition and genuine, widespread devotion, or whether it functions as a strategic institution that different political powers support because it helps stabilize the region. Both can be true. You can have real belief and real politics braided together so tightly you cannot separate them without tearing the rope. You watch a worker carry a basket of grain toward a storage room, and you see, in one simple action, both faith and economics. Grain is food. Food is survival. Survival is order. And order is Enlil's brand. You move closer to the inner spaces, and you can feel the boundary lines even when you cannot see them. Certain thresholds are not for everyone. Some doors are for priests only. Some courtyards are for specific rituals. Your body reads the social rules before your mind does. You slow down. You keep to the edges. You do not want to be the person who accidentally strolls into the Holy of Holies like it is a museum exhibit. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of a security guard clearing his throat. In the shade of a wall, you spot a small group of people waiting. Their hands are full of offerings, dates, bread, a small clay figurine. One woman holds a jar sealed with pitch. Her eyes are tired. She is not here for philosophy. She is here because her child has been sick, or her husband is away, or the harvest looks uncertain and she needs the sky to be less unpredictable. You stand near her, and for a moment, the whole grand idea of divine law becomes personal. Enlil's decrees are not just cosmic proclamations. They ripple into households. They decide whether you sleep peacefully or count your worries like beads. A low chant rises, and you follow its sound. You catch phrases that praise Enlil's strength and his authority over the lands. The repetition is soothing. Like waves, it is also a mental program, training everyone present to accept the hierarchy of the cosmos. Enlil above, humans below, priests as translators, kings as executors. You feel the power of that structure the way you feel gravity. It is not forced on you with violence in this moment. It is offered as the natural shape of reality. And then, because life loves timing, a gust sweeps through the precinct, lifting dust and tugging at loose cloth. The chant wobbles for half a breath and then steadies again. You watch the priests continue without panic, and you realize they are used to improvising around the sky. Their whole job is to keep the relationship stable even when the air itself interrupts. Somewhere in your modern mind you think, this is the original customer service. And you almost laugh out loud, but you swallow it because you do not want to be struck by lightning for being sarcastic in a sacred courtyard. That would be such a bad headline. You linger near a wall covered in small impressions, marks of past offerings, past rituals, past hands. You can almost feel the generations who stood where you stand, looking for reassurance that the world has rules. In Nippur, Enlil's law is not an abstract concept. It is a lived environment. The city is shaped around the idea that heaven's breath can be approached, honored, negotiated with carefully, and maybe, just maybe, persuaded to be kind. You take a slow breath and taste incense and dust. Ahead, deeper in the complex, the echo arises, and you feel your curiosity tighten into focus. You are not just walking into a temple. You are walking into the mechanism by which a civilization convinces itself that order is possible. You drift onward through Nippurzids, and the deeper you go, the more the city feels like it is made of rules you cannot see. You do not bump into people as much. You do not hear as many spontaneous laughs. Even the animals seem to keep their opinions to themselves. You are entering the zone where the air is treated like a document, where every breath could be interpreted as approval or complaint. The wind slides along the walls and through courtyards as if it owns the place, which, in the local worldview, it kind of does. A scribe's courtyard opens to your left, and you pause there, because something about it is weirdly familiar. Not the clay, not the reed styluses, but the vibe. It feels like an office. If an office had incense and a strong possibility of divine judgment, there are benches. There are stacks of tablets drying in the shade. There is a small jar of water for smoothing clay, the ancient equivalent of a desk plant that everyone pretends keeps them emotionally stable. A young apprentice sits stiffly, tongue slightly out as he presses wedge-shaped signs into a tablet, making cuneiform marks that look like tiny bird tracks. You can feel his concentration, like a hum. Here is the mainstream historical fact that snaps into place. Writing in Mesopotamia develops in large part for administration and record-keeping, and the temple institutions play a major role in training scribes and producing tablets that track offerings, labor, trade, and legal agreements. These are not just stories. They are receipts, contracts, and ledgers, and they are everywhere. When people talk about civilization, they often picture kings and wars. But you are standing in the real engine room, people writing down who owes what to whom. And this is where Enlil starts feeling less like a distant storm and more like the spirit of bureaucracy itself. Not because he's boring, but because he is the authority behind the authority. If Enlil's command is law, then the tablet is the way law is made portable. The wind speaks, the priest interprets, the scribe presses it into clay, and suddenly the sky's will can be stored on a shelf. That is an unsettling power move when you think about it. Imagine bottling the weather into paperwork. Your modern brain wants to call it control. Their world calls it order. You step closer to the apprentices, and you see the tools up close. A reed stylus, cut at an angle, makes wedges when pressed. That is all cuneiform really is at first. Impressions, not ink. It is writing designed for clay. The medium shapes the message. Literally. A mistake can be smoothed over while wet, but once baked or dried, it becomes permanent. You watch an apprentice pause, frown, and then carefully scrape away a sign to rewrite it. The anxiety in his shoulders is timeless. You can almost hear him thinking, if I mess this up, my whole career becomes barley farming, which, to be fair, is an honest career. But you know how pride works. A senior scribe sits nearby, older, calmer, with hands that move like they have memorized the shape of language. He is making a tablet that looks more formal, the lines straighter, the spacing cleaner. A seal impression sits at the bottom like a signature, a tiny carved image rolled across clay. These cylinder seals are one of those small marvels that make you grin. People wear them on cords, like jewelry that doubles as identity verification. If you have ever reset a password and hated your life for 5 minutes, you're going to appreciate the elegance of roll seal done. Of course, if someone steals your seal, your life is also ruined. So it is not perfect. Nothing is perfect. Enlil's law includes that too. You listen as someone reads aloud, the sound of Sumerian words flowing like water over stones. The tablet is a contract, land boundaries, a loan, an agreement for labor. It is not about gods directly, and yet the entire thing breathes with sacred gravity. Because the temple is involved, because witnesses are present, because oaths invoke divine powers. The phrase before Enlil might not be written on every tablet, but the concept is everywhere. Like a ceiling you do not notice until you jump, quirky tidbit time, sliding in with a sleepy grin. There is a long tradition in Mesopotamian culture of treating written objects as potent in themselves. A tablet is not just information, it is a thing with authority. Later, myths amplify this idea into the legendary Tablet of Destinies, an object that grants cosmic control. Whether or not anyone in this courtyard believes in that exact object right now, the emotional logic is already here. If you can write it, you can bind it. If you can bind it, you can stabilize the world, or at least pretend you can, which sometimes is enough to keep people from panicking. You move along the courtyard edge and notice baskets of tokens, small clay counters. Some scholars point to these as early accounting tools, used before full writing. a kind of counting system that evolves into complex notation. You imagine a temple official explaining it to a farmer. Yes, your barley is represented by this little cone shape. No, you cannot eat the cone shape. The farmer sighs. Civilization continues. A priest appears, and the scribes straighten. Not dramatically, just enough to show awareness. The priest carries a list of offerings that must be recorded. Oil, wool, grain, maybe a small animal. The scribe takes the request and begins pressing signs, creating a permanent memory of the transaction. It hits you how much this system depends on trust. Trust in the scribes, trust in the temple, trust that the gods will honor the structure. If Enlil is law, then law is only as real as the community's agreement to live inside it. That agreement is constantly reinforced here, in tiny acts of writing and witnessing. Historians still argue whether the earliest legal practices in Mesopotamia are primarily secular economic tools that later get wrapped in divine language, or whether divine authority is foundational from the beginning, shaping what people even consider enforceable. You can see the debate right in the courtyard. The contract is about land, not heaven, but the solemnity of it feels religious. The temple is not separate from daily life. It is embedded in it like salt in bread. You wander into a narrower lane leading toward another part of the complex, and the walls close in. The air is cooler in the shade. You hear the soft thud of clay being set down, the scrape of reeds, the murmur of voices. You pass a storage room entrance and catch a glimpse of stacked jars, sealed with clay stoppers and stamped. Even food is documented. Even movement is recorded. It is comforting in a way, like the world has an organized spine, but it is also a little suffocating, like living inside a filing cabinet. A small group gathers around a tablet being read out loud. The reading is formal, and you catch the cadence of witnesses being named. Witnesses are everything, because the tablet alone is powerful, but the community is the one that gives it teeth. If a dispute happens, you need people who can say, "Yes, I saw this agreement." The temple's role here is not just spiritual. It is social enforcement. It is the place where memory becomes official. You picture Enlil, not as a bearded storm giant for a moment, but as the invisible principle that makes this possible. The air between people. The shared belief that words matter, that agreements matter, that the future can be organized. Enlil's law is not just a thunderclap. It is this. A farmer can lend seed and expect repayment because the world has structure. A worker can be assigned labor and receive rations because someone wrote it down. A temple can promise protection because it claims a relationship with the sky. And still, even in this tidy order, you feel the tension. Because what happens when the flood comes anyway? What happens when the crops fail? What happens when a king decides the rules do not apply to him? The tablets cannot stop weather. They cannot stop greed. But they can create a narrative that says, this is how things should be. And in a place where the environment is unpredictable, should is a kind of shelter. You pass a doorway where a tablet is being baked, heat shimmering. That moment is oddly intimate. Clay becomes permanent. A decision becomes history. You feel a shiver, like watching a photograph develop, except it is the birth of bureaucracy. You think about how, thousands of years later, people will dig these tablets out of the earth and reconstruct voices, agreements, anxieties, and hopes. You are standing at the source of that long paper trail, only it is not paper, and the paper trail is literally dirt. A breeze slips through the corridor again, stirring dust. You cannot help smiling. The air keeps moving, indifferent and present. Enlil is not a statue here. He is a force that gives weight to words. You continue toward the heart of Nipper's sacred spaces, and the sound of scribes fades behind you, replaced by something deeper, the hush of a place where law is not just written, but believed to be breathed into existence. You leave the scribes behind, and it feels like stepping out of a humming machine. The air changes again, less dusty, more perfumed, like the city is trying to impress the sky with good manners. The path curves toward a broader courtyard, and the walls rise higher, catching the morning light in pale bands. You can sense that you're approaching the part of the temple world where decisions become public, where Enlil's invisible law is not only recorded but performed. Like a play everyone depends on for rent money, a crowd has gathered. Not a wild crowd. More like the calm clustering you see outside a courthouse or a concert hall, except the concert is a ritual and the headliner is a god you cannot see. People stand with baskets, jars, folded cloth. They shift their weight, murmur to each other, glance toward a doorway guarded by temple officials. You slip into the edge of the group, doing your best impression of just here to observe, absolutely not about to commit sacrilege. And your heart beats a little faster, because even in imagination, ancient sacred space has this pressure. It makes you want to whisper. Then you hear it, that low ripple through the crowd. A king is coming, not king in the glittering fairy tale way. More like a man surrounded by proof. He arrives with attendants, guards, and a few officials carrying items that look both ceremonial and practical. There is no golden crown flashing like a spotlight. There are robes, yes, and jewelry, yes, but the real crown is the choreography of respect. People bow slightly. Some touch their foreheads. The temple officials straighten like reeds in a gust. Mainstream historical fact, slipped gently into your listening ear. In ancient Mesopotamia, kingship is commonly framed as something granted by the gods. Rulers present themselves as chosen, supported, or authorized by major deities, and Enlil, as a high god associated with authority, is frequently invoked in that legitimizing language, especially in Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. That is not just propaganda in the modern cynical sense. It is a cultural framework. If the cosmos has order, the king's job is to mirror it on earth. You watch the ruler approach the temple threshold, and the scene feels like a negotiation. He is powerful in the human world, but in this space he is a guest. He pauses, performs a gesture, maybe a bow, maybe an offering. Priests speak to him with formal respect that still implies hierarchy. Yes, you are king, but Enlil is above your pay grade. It is the kind of dynamic you see when a CEO visits a regulator, smiling carefully while pretending not to sweat. The king's attendants carry offerings forward: grain, oil, fine textiles, perhaps a small animal. The items are placed in an orderly way, not tossed. This is not a feast. It is a transaction, a public one, and the public matters. The crowd needs to see that the king participates in the cosmic contract. He gives to Enlil, and in return, Enlil grants stability, victory, fertile fields, and the right to command. You can almost hear the unspoken clause. If the king does not honor this, the sky might revoke him. Quirky tidbit time, the kind that makes your eyebrows lift. In some Mesopotamian narratives, the idea of kingship itself is treated like a thing that can move, almost like an object passed from city to city. Later, lists and traditions talk about kingship descending from heaven and being transferred as dynasties rise and fall. Whether you treat that as mythic metaphor or as an ideological tool, it is deliciously strange. It is as if leadership is not something humans invent, but something the sky loans out. Like Enlil has a cosmic rental service and the late fees are catastrophic, you stand there watching, and you feel the double-layered reality. On one layer, this is ritual. On another, this is politics. The temple is not just blessing the king, it is also anchoring its own status. If the king needs Enlil's approval, then the priests who speak for Enlil become indispensable. It is a partnership, sometimes smooth, sometimes tense. You can almost sense the careful balance in the way the king's eyes flick briefly toward the priests, measuring, assessing, and the priests, in turn, measure him back, their faces serene, their power quiet. Historians still argue whether temple institutions in places like Nipa are primarily subordinate to kings, serving as ideological support for state power, or whether they can act as semi-independent power centers that shape and constrain rulers. You are watching the argument in motion. The king is honored, but he is also being reminded, publicly, that his authority is borrowed. He rules on behalf of something bigger, something that can be invoked against him if needed. That is a clever system. Honestly, terrifying, but clever. A priest begins to recite a hymn, and the rhythm settles over the courtyard like a blanket. The words praise Enlil's strength, his ability to decree fate, his command over the lands. The king stands still, absorbing it, letting it wash over him like anointed oil. The crowd listens too, because the hymn is not only for the god, it is for them. It tells them who is in charge of the universe, and therefore who is in charge of their taxes. You feel a tiny modern part of you want to roll your eyes, but another part of you recognizes the comfort in it. If life is uncertain, a strong story can keep you from falling apart. The king steps forward and touches something near the threshold. Perhaps a symbol, perhaps a ritual object. He might pour a libation, a careful stream of liquid that darkens the earth. The liquid disappears into the ground, and you think about how offerings are always like that. You give something valuable to the unseen. You watch it vanish, and you trust that the vanishing is not waste but communication. It is like sending a message and hoping it gets delivered. The crowd begins to shift, a soft murmur of approval. You notice how many eyes keep sliding up to the sky, not because they expect lightning on cue, but because the sky is part of the audience. Enlil's law is not only spoken in temples, it is seen in weather. A clear day after a ritual feels like a nod. A sudden storm feels like a rebuke. People learn to read patterns because patterns give the illusion of control. And sometimes, just sometimes, the patterns are real enough to feed. A temple official approaches the king with a tablet. Yes, a tablet. Because, of course, even sacred authority wants documentation. The king's seal might be rolled, or witnesses named, or an offering recorded. You realize how seamlessly the divine and administrative worlds merge. Enlil's law does not float above the city like a vague concept. It drops into clay, into schedules, into ration lists, into who gets to own what and who gets to work where. The king is not just receiving blessing, he is aligning his government with a cosmic file system. And because you are human, you notice the little human cracks in the grand performance. A guard shifts his stance because his foot hurts. An attendant's sleeve slips and he adjusts it quickly. A child in the crowd squirms, bored, and gets gently elbowed by a parent. The sacred is happening, yes, but also the ordinary. This is one of the most intimate truths of ancient religion. It is not separate from daily life. It is daily life wearing a better robe. The ritual concludes with a final chant and a moment of stillness. The king turns, and as he moves back toward the outer courtyard, the crowd parts like water. People bow again. Some reach out slightly, not touching him, but close enough to feel the aura of power. You can almost feel the psychological effect. If Enlil has chosen him, then being near him is being near the sky's favor. It is contagious in the mind. As the king disappears from view, the courtyard does not empty immediately. People linger, exchanging quiet comments. Did the priest's voice falter? Did the wind shift at a certain phrase? Did the king look confident or worried? It is like fans discussing a performance, except the stakes are harvests, wars, and the stability of everything you own. You stand there and feel the weight of it. Kings borrow thunder. They borrow sky law. But the borrowing creates debt, and debt creates pressure. You turn away from the crowd and continue along a corridor that leads deeper into the temple complex, toward the place where Enlil's presence is said to be strongest. Your footsteps soften on packed earth. The air cools. The incense thickens. Somewhere ahead, behind another threshold, the idea of law becomes something even more intimate, not public ritual, but the private machinery of sacred authority, where a whispered omen can change the fate of a city. You move deeper, and the world narrows into corridors of mud brick and plaster that feel like they were built to make you forget your own importance. The light thins, the air cools, your footsteps sound softer, like the building is absorbing them out of politeness, or maybe because sacred spaces love a good hush. Somewhere above, wind slides over rooftops, and you feel it through the structure like a slow breath through ribs. The echo is not just a place you enter, it is a place that enters you, reorganizing your nerves until you start thinking in quiet. Ahead, the temple complex rises in layered terraces, a deliberate refusal to stay flat. You have seen hints of this already, but here it becomes obvious. Humans are manufacturing a mountain for a god of air. The architecture is theology with bricks. Every step upward says, the sky matters, and you are climbing toward its rules. Mainstream historical fact, woven into your ascent, major Mesopotamian temples, especially in important cult centers, are built as monumental complexes that serve religious, administrative, and economic functions. Over time, these sacred precincts can include raised platforms and later ziggurat structures, emphasizing height and visibility, while also housing storerooms, workshops, and priestly quarters. The temple is not a chapel. It is a city within a city. You climb a short ramp, and your calves politely remind you that ancient life involves more legwork than scrolling. The ramp leads to a terrace where the view opens. Below, Nippur sprawls in a soft brown pattern, rooftops like stacked loaves, canals threading through like dark stitches. The air up here feels cleaner, breezier. You understand the temptation to call this place closer to heaven, even if heaven is not a physical roof but a concept. Height changes your mind. It makes the world look ordered, as if the messy streets below are part of a plan rather than a chaotic collection of arguments and cooking fires. A priest walks past, carrying a bundle of reeds. Another carries a small container, careful, as if it holds something that must not spill. You realize the temple is alive with labor. People are not only praying, they are baking bread for offerings, weaving cloth, repairing walls, calculating rations. The divine does not float above the practical. It demands it. You reach an inner courtyard where the sound of your own breathing becomes louder. The walls here are thicker, the entrances narrower. It is an intentional compression of space, the architectural equivalent of lowering your voice. You can feel the social boundaries too. The further inward you go, the fewer people you see and the more specialized they are. You're drifting toward the heart, the place that is less public theater and more intimate engine. Quirky tidbit, because this is where it fits beautifully. The name Ikur is often interpreted as something like House of the Mountain. And in mythic imagination it becomes more than a building. It is a cosmic anchor. Some descriptions treat it as a place where destinies are decreed, where the boundary between divine and human is thinner. You might picture it like a spiritual server room. The rest of the world runs on what happens in there. And yes, your brain immediately imagines a priest whispering, "Have you tried turning the cosmos off and on again?" And you have to bite back a laugh. You stop near a doorway where a relief or painted symbol marks the threshold. The decoration is not for aesthetics alone. It is a sign. Beyond here, you are entering deeper levels of sacred protocol. You feel that familiar human impulse to straighten up, even though no one asked you to. Sacred spaces do that. They make your spine behave. A temple official notices you lingering and does not shoo you away with anger, but with a kind of calm, practiced authority, he gestures subtly, directing you to remain at the edge. You comply. This is not your house. This is Enlil's, inside the inner area. You catch glimpses of rituals that are less flashy than the king's public offering, but somehow heavier. A priest pours water into a basin and washes his hands with slow deliberation. Another arranges objects on a small altar, bread, dates, perhaps a tiny bowl of salt. The actions are repetitive, and that repetition is the point. It is the same movement done day after day, like breathing exercises for a civilization. The idea is to keep the relationship stable, to keep Enlil's law from feeling distant or unpredictable. Historians still argue whether the grandeur of Mesopotamian temple architecture is primarily about impressing gods, impressing humans, or both in equal measure. You stand here and think. It is both, and the both is the trick. A massive temple says to the sky, "We built you something worthy." It says to the people, "We are connected to the sky." And it says to rival cities, "Good luck arguing with our divine landlord." You edge along a wall and look up at the layers of brickwork. The plaster is smooth in places, patched in others, like a face that has lived. You imagine how many hands have shaped this structure. How many baskets of mud have been carried up ramps? How many bricks have been dried under the same sun you feel warming your shoulders now? There is something quietly moving about it. Devotion here is not only singing, it is hauling. A low chant begins somewhere deeper inside, not loud enough to make out words, but you feel its rhythm. The sound is almost like wind moving through a narrow passage, rising and falling. It is easy to slip into a trance. You understand why sacred music becomes so powerful. It trains your nervous system. It makes the temple feel like it is breathing with you, or maybe breathing through you. You sit for a moment, because you're allowed to rest on the edge, and because your imagination appreciates a pause. From here, you can see a line of small rooms opening off a corridor. Storerooms, workshops, priestly spaces. You catch a whiff of barley beer from somewhere, faint and yeasty. You smile, because even the holiest precincts are still powered by carbs. Somewhere, a priest is probably thinking, "Yes, Enlil is supreme, but also, I would like lunch." That is your second little joke for this section, and you allow yourself the softness of it. A temple worker carries a basket of offerings past you, and you notice something. The basket is not overflowing with luxury. It is practical. Bread, oil, maybe wool, everyday goods. That is important. It tells you that Enlil's sanctuary is not only for kings. It is sustained by the daily contributions of ordinary lives. People give a portion of their labor to maintain cosmic order. They are paying rent to reality. You tilt your head and listen for the wind again. Up here, at this height, the breeze is more constant. It brushes your cheeks, cool and dry. You think about how Enlil's identity as a god of air makes so much sense in a place where air can be gentle or violent, nourishing or destructive. The temple, raised toward the sky, is a way to meet that power halfway. It is like standing on tiptoe to talk to a tall person, hoping they will hear you without stepping on you. Your mind drifts to the story logic behind all this. If the world is built on decrees, then the temple is where decrees are received, renewed, and enforced. You can feel the pressure of that belief. It makes the priests guardians of order, but also potential gatekeepers. If they claim to know Enlil's will, they can guide the city, or they can manipulate it. That tension is always there, humming under the incense. You watch a priest enter a deeper chamber and disappear. You cannot follow. The boundary holds, and the boundary itself teaches you something. Mystery is part of authority. If everyone could walk into the innermost room, Enlil would feel less like the sky and more like a neighbor. Distance makes power. Height makes awe. Restricted access makes law. A gust pushes through. Stronger now, and a loose cloth on a hanging line flutters sharply. For a split second, it looks like a signal. A worker glances up, then continues. You sense how trained everyone is to interpret the environment without being ruled by panic. The temple is a school for that training. It teaches people to live under uncertainty with ritual as a stabilizer. You stand again, feeling the firmness of the platform under your feet. Below, the city continues its busy life, unaware of your quiet thoughts. Up here, the infer holds steady, a manufactured mountain where Enlil's breath is believed to condense into order. You look toward the deepest part of the sanctuary, and you feel that the next step is not just architectural, it is mythic, because the higher you climb into Enlil's world, the more you will start seeing storms not as weather, but as messages. And messages, in this place, always come with consequences. You remain up on the terrace long enough for your thoughts to slow into the temple's rhythm. The air moves steadily, a cool hand brushing the back of your neck, and you start to understand why a storm can feel like a moral verdict here. Down in the streets, weather is inconvenience. Up here, weather is language. The wind does not just happen. The wind means. And when you live between two wild rivers, meaning can feel like the only umbrella you own. You descend a little. Not all the way out, but into a side passage where the priests and workers move like they have memorized every corner. You pass a small alcove with a shelf of offerings, a bowl of dates, a lump of incense resin, a tiny figurine left by someone who probably whispered, "Please, just let my family be okay." The figurine is crude, but the intention is sharp. You feel a pinch of tenderness, because across thousands of years, this part is the same. People keep asking the universe to be less unpredictable. A priest's voice carries from a courtyard ahead, and you follow it like a cat follows a warm patch of sunlight. The courtyard is open to the sky, and you can see clouds building faintly on the horizon, pale and tall, like stacks of wool. The priest is speaking about omens and proper conduct, and the crowd listening looks serious in that way. People look when they are being reminded that consequences exist. Mainstream historical fact, tucked into the scene. Mesopotamian societies develop elaborate systems of divination and omen interpretation, including reading celestial phenomena and weather events. And these practices become closely tied to temple institutions and royal decision-making. Storms, unusual winds, lightning, and floods can be interpreted as signs of divine approval or anger. It is not just religion. It is an early framework for risk management. The priest gestures toward the sky as if it is a blackboard. He speaks of Enlil's breath, and you can feel everyone's attention tighten. The idea is simple and huge. If Enlil is authority, then nature itself is part of the legal system. A flood is not just water, it is a sentence. A drought is not just lack, it is correction. The weather becomes moralized, and that moralization is both comforting and exhausting. Comforting because it implies the world is not random. Exhausting because it implies you might always be at fault. You watch a farmer in the crowd, hands rough, face lined by sun and worry. He listens like someone listening to a doctor's diagnosis. You realize that for him, weather talk is not abstract. A storm at the wrong time can erase a year of labor. A flood can sweep away a house. When the priest says, Enlil is displeased, it is not just spiritual drama. It is economic reality with a divine face. Quirky tidbit, gently placed in your palm. There are traditions where Enlil's word is described as so powerful it can create and destroy with a command. And some hymns and myths treat his voice and the storm as almost the same thing. The thunder is not merely accompanying the decree. It is the decree, spoken loud enough for the ground to hear. That idea makes you look at the sky differently. When clouds stack up, you imagine them forming syllables. A breeze sweeps the courtyard and tugs at the priest's robe. He does not flinch. He uses it, pauses as if the wind is punctuating his sentence. The crowd murmurs, and you can tell they felt it too. This is the subtle dance. People interpret nature, and nature keeps giving them material. Sometimes the timing is purely coincidence, but coincidence is a playground for belief. Your modern brain wants to label it confirmation bias. Their ancient brain labels it, the god is speaking. Both brains are trying to survive. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian moral interpretations of disaster are primarily a religious theological development, or whether they also function as social tools to encourage cooperation, compliance, and communal responsibility. You can see the social tool part plainly. If a flood is seen as punishment for neglecting ritual or justice, then people have a reason to maintain temples, respect oaths, and keep the king accountable, at least in theory. But you can also see the human need part. When chaos hits, meaning is a bandage. The priest finishes, and the crowd begins to disperse. You remain, looking at the clouds. They have grown a little darker now, a faint bruised color along their undersides. The wind shifts, warmer for a moment, then cooler again. You feel that old animal awareness in your skin, the sense that weather is changing. For a second, you wish you had a phone. Then you remember. Your phone would just say, chance of rain. It would not tell you whether the universe is mad at you, which is both a relief and, weirdly, less dramatic. You wander toward a canal that runs near the temple precinct. The water is slow, reflecting the sky in broken pieces. A worker is clearing debris from a channel, using a stick to pry out reeds. Water management is life here. Irrigation canals are the arteries of agriculture, and keeping them clear is a constant job. You watch him work and feel how deeply the society depends on maintaining order in nature. The canals are human attempts to negotiate with the rivers, to turn unpredictable flooding into useful watering. And every time the system fails, the failure can be blamed on human error, divine displeasure, or both. The clouds thicken further, and a few people glance up, faces tightening. Someone mutters a short prayer. Someone else hurries with a basket, eager to get under a roof. You can feel the mood shift across the city like a shadow. Storms are not only physical events. They are communal emotions. A first drop hits your forearm. It is cool and surprisingly heavy. Then another. The wind rises, pushing the scent of wet earth ahead of the rain. You taste the change in the air. Metallic, sharp, like the sky is clearing its throat. You think. So this is what it feels like when Enlil decides to speak louder. The rain begins in earnest. Not a drizzle, but quick, forceful drops that darken the dust into spots. People move faster now, but not in panic, in practiced response. A woman pulls a cloth over her head. A child squeals, half delighted, half scared. A man swears under his breath, and you mentally label it as PG-13 appropriate frustration, because ancient people absolutely have the full range of human reactions. The temple workers begin closing doors, securing objects. Everyone knows the drill. Thunder rumbles in the distance, low and rolling. You feel it in your ribs. The sound is not just sound. In the cultural imagination, it is Enlil's presence, his approval or warning. And because you are human, your body responds. Your heart rate lifts. Your muscles tense. You are built to respect thunder. The myth is not fighting your biology. It is riding it. You duck under an overhang near a wall, watching the rain streak down. Water runs along the ground in thin streams, seeking channels. For a moment, you see how quickly the city can shift from dry dust to flowing mud. A heavy storm can turn streets into slippery messes, can flood low spaces, can collapse poorly maintained walls. It is not hard to imagine why storms become moral stories. They are overwhelming. They humble you. A priest appears nearby, lifting his hands toward the sky. He begins to chant. The chant is steady, measured, like a rope thrown into chaotic water. People who are close enough join in softly, and you feel the communal attempt to respond properly. The ritual is not just for the god. It is for the people, to keep them from spiraling into fear. And here, you catch another layer. The storm is a sermon, not only in myth, but in practice. It teaches cooperation. It teaches preparedness. It teaches that your actions matter, because the consequences are real. Whether Enlil is literally sending the rain, or whether the rain is simply the rain, the social function is clear. The storm becomes a reminder that life is contingent and that order must be maintained. As the thunder rolls again, you recall the king in the courtyard, the scribes pressing contracts, the priests guarding thresholds. All of it is designed to create stability under a sky that can undo stability in an afternoon. Enlil's law, then, is not just a set of divine commands. It is a worldview that turns weather into ethics. It says, if you want the world to behave, you must behave too. The rain begins to ease, the drops spacing out. The clouds lighten slightly at the edges. The city exhales. People emerge, shaking water from cloth, laughing softly with relief. A child splashes in a puddle and gets scolded, because joy is allowed, but also, please do not invite illness. You smile, because even in sacred societies, parenting is eternal. You step out from the overhang and feel the damp ground under your feet. The air is fresh now, washed. The wind is calmer, as if Enlil has finished his sentence. You know, though, that this is only the beginning of the deeper mythic argument. If Enlil uses storms as law, what happens when other gods disagree with his judgments? Because somewhere in the Pantheon, there is another voice, cleverer, softer, and far more willing to bend rules. You are about to overhear their conflict like thunder behind a closed door. You walk while the ground is still damp, and every step carries that soft suction sound that makes you feel like the earth is gently arguing with your feet. The rain has washed the city clean in patches, turning dust into darker clay, making the walls look freshly painted even though they are the same tired bricks they were an hour ago. The air is cooler, and the wind has that satisfied, post-storm calm, like Enlil just delivered a lecture and now expects everyone to reflect quietly. But you do not get to reflect for long. because you start to notice something else in the way people talk. Even in Nippur, there is a second name that slips into conversations like a wink. Enki. You hear it in a mother's warning to her child, half joking, "Don't be clever like Enki." You hear it in a worker muttering after a temple official gives instructions. Fine, fine. Enlil's law, but Enki knows ways. The tone changes whenever Enki is mentioned. Enlil's name makes shoulders square. Enki's name makes eyes flick sideways, as if someone might be listening. And then the mouth curls into a tiny smile. Mainstream historical fact, gently placed on your path. In Sumerian mythology, Enlil and Enki are two major deities with distinct domains and personalities. Enlil is strongly associated with authority, storms, and decrees, while Enki, also known later as Ea in Akkadian contexts, is associated with wisdom, fresh water, crafting, and cunning problem-solving. Their roles can complement each other, but myths often frame them in tension, reflecting different models of power. You follow that tension like a thread. It leads you away from the most central terrace and toward a quieter area where temple staff do their work, where the sacred meets the practical in less ceremonial ways. Here, you see people dealing with water channels again, adjusting gates, clearing debris. Fresh water is not just life, it is strategy. And Enki, Lord of the Sweet Waters, feels close in these moments. You stop by a small basin where water collects, and you watch ripples move across the surface. The wind touches the water, and the water answers. You suddenly understand the mythic contrast in physical terms. Enlil is air, commanding from above, changing everything with force. Enki is water, moving around obstacles, finding gaps, reshaping the world patiently. One rules by decree, the other rules by knowing the loopholes. Quirky tidbit time, drifting in like a playful fish. Enki in myths is famously willing to bend rules, sneak around strict decisions, and sometimes rescue humans from the harsher consequences of divine plans. He is the one who, in later flood traditions, warns a human to build a boat, essentially leaking the sky's confidential memo. If Enlil is the cosmic judge, Enki is the clever friend who knows which forms to file so you do not get fined into oblivion. You picture the divine council, the gods like officials in a heavenly meeting room, and you cannot help imagining Enlil slamming a tablet down and saying, "Order," while Enki leans back, smiling, already thinking of a workaround. You almost laugh, because it is so human, this projection of political personality onto nature. But it is also psychologically sharp. People who live under authority always dream of cleverness. People who fear storms love a god who can outsmart them. Historians still argue whether the conflict between Enlil and Enki in myth reflects real historical rivalries between priestly centers and regional power bases, or whether it is primarily a theological exploration of how order and adaptability coexist in a complex society. Again, you feel both. Different cities have different gods emphasized. Different temples compete for prestige. But even without politics, the myth expresses a real dilemma. Do you survive by obeying rules, or by being flexible when rules become dangerous? You wander back toward the temple precinct's edge, and you find a small group of lower-ranking temple workers sharing bread. Their conversation is quiet, casual, and you realize these people are the social bloodstream of myth. They are not composing epic hymns. They are living inside the worldview. One worker complains about a supervisor's strictness and calls him Enlil-like, which earns a few suppressed chuckles. Another says, "Better Enlil than chaos." And someone else replies, "Chaos is hungry, but Enki feeds you." They chew thoughtfully. Myth is not distant here. It is slang. A temple assistant stands up and begins to demonstrate a ritual technique, showing how to pour water in a certain pattern, how to recite a short phrase, how to place a small offering near a channel gate. It is like maintenance work with divine etiquette. You watch, fascinated, because it reveals the compromise between the two gods' styles. The temple may be Enlil's, but water rituals are essential. You cannot run a city with air alone. You need canals, wells, and irrigation. Enki's domain is always present, even if Enlil's name is higher on the sign. The wind picks up a little, carrying the smell of wet earth and cooking smoke. You feel the ongoing conversation between elements, air drying the mud, water feeding the fields, heat returning with the sun. The gods are not just characters. They are models for how the world behaves. Enlil is sudden change, force, proclamation. Enki is flow, knowledge, adjustment. You begin to sense why the mythic authority clash matters so much. Enlil's law is necessary, because without shared rules, the city fractures. People fight over water rights, land boundaries, labor duties. But Enlil's law can also be too rigid, too quick to punish, too willing to wipe the slate clean. Enki represents the survival instinct that says, yes, order, but also mercy. Yes, rules, but also exceptions. The myth gives people a way to talk about this without directly accusing their leaders, which is convenient when leaders have guards. You drift toward a small shrine-like space near a water feature, not grand, but cared for. A simple altar, a few offerings. You notice how people pause here, touch the edge of the basin, whisper. It is an informal devotion, the kind that happens when someone wants help but does not have time for official ceremony. This feels Enki-ish, like a backdoor conversation. You imagine someone thinking, Enlil is busy running the universe, but Enki might actually answer my message. It is the ancient equivalent of emailing the helpful co-worker instead of the boss. And then, because the universe loves symmetry, a gust of wind sweeps through and flutters the water surface into a shimmer. The shrine feels briefly alive, the two elements touching. You can almost hear an argument, not hostile, but firm. Enlil saying, structure. Enki saying, survival. Enlil insisting, decrees. Enki replying, solutions. In some stories, Enlil's decisions are portrayed as harsh, even dangerous for humans, while Enki's interventions are portrayed as protective. But it is not always that simple. Enlil can be a guardian of civilization, the one who keeps things from dissolving into violence. Enki's cleverness can sometimes cause trouble too, loosening boundaries, introducing unpredictable outcomes. The myth is not a cartoon of good and evil. It is a debate about governance. Historians still argue whether these divine personality contrasts are primarily literary devices, or whether they reflect genuine shifts in religious emphasis as different cultural groups interact across Mesopotamia. You stand in damp clay, listening to real people use divine names to talk about power, and you think, it can be both, again. Literature and life feed each other. People tell stories because they need to process reality. Reality then starts following the story, because the story shapes expectations. You notice a messenger moving quickly through the temple area. Face serious. He speaks to a priest in low tones. The priest's eyes narrow slightly, and he looks toward the horizon, where the clouds have thinned but not vanished. Something is coming. Not necessarily weather this time. Maybe news of a flood upstream. Maybe tension between cities. Maybe an omen reported by a watchman. You feel the shift in atmosphere. the sense that the divine argument between authority and cunning is about to become urgent. Because when danger approaches, the question returns. Do you obey the sky's law strictly, or do you find a way around it to save lives? Enlil's decree might demand punishment. Enki's wisdom might demand mercy. And in the great tradition of Mesopotamian storytelling, this tension is going to crest in the biggest, wettest, most emotionally loaded myth of all, the flood memory. You feel it gathering like water behind a levee, and you keep walking, knowing you're about to step into a story where even the gods disagree about whether humanity deserves to stay afloat. You follow the messenger's urgency like you are being pulled by a quiet current. The temple corridors seem narrower now, not because the bricks moved, but because your mind has shifted. When people start whispering about upstream water, about omens, about a strange pattern in the clouds, the whole city contracts inward, as if everyone is bracing. You can feel it in the way footsteps speed up, in the way conversations lower into tight, cautious syllables. Water is not just water here. Water is memory. Water is threat. Water is a story that never fully goes away. You end up near a small chamber where a few priests and scribes are gathered with tablets. Their posture is different from the casual office hum you saw earlier. This is the posture of people handling something that can change the world. A scribe reads aloud from a text, not loudly, but with that careful cadence of someone reciting something sacred and dangerous at the same time. You catch fragments. A great flood. Divine decision. A man warned. A boat built. Life preserved. Even without the full words, your body recognizes the shape of the narrative. It is the kind of story that hits a primal nerve. Mainstream historical fact, placed gently but firmly. Flood narratives appear in Mesopotamian literature in multiple forms, including Sumerian and Akkadian versions such as the Sumerian flood story, associated with Ziusudra, and later accounts in the Atrahasis epic and the Epic of Gilgamesh with Utnapishtim. These stories are among the earliest known flood myths in world literature, and they shape later traditions in the region. The flood is not a one-off tale. It is a theme that repeats because the rivers keep threatening to become seas. You stand at the edge of the chamber, listening, and you feel the Enlil and Enki tension tighten into something sharper. In many versions, the gods decide humanity is too noisy, too disruptive, too much, and they plan a flood to wipe the slate clean. Enlil often appears as a leading force behind that decision, embodying the strict, thunderous side of divine law. Enough is enough. Enki, by contrast, becomes the god who slips a warning to a human, often by speaking to a wall or through a dream. Technically not telling the person directly, because loopholes are his love language, quirky tidbit, delivered like a secret under a blanket. The idea that Enki warns the human by speaking to a reed wall is one of those details that feels both mythic and strangely practical. A wall cannot testify in divine court. A wall cannot be accused of betrayal. So Enki talks to a wall, and the human overhears. It is a cosmic legal gymnastics, so if you have ever tried to obey the letter of a rule while absolutely ignoring the spirit of it, you understand Enki more than you want to admit. The priests' faces stay composed as they recite, but you sense the weight underneath. Flood stories are not just entertainment. They are explanations for trauma. The Mesopotamian plain can experience catastrophic flooding, and archaeology and geology have long wrestled with evidence for significant flood events in ancient layers, though not necessarily a single universal flood. The myth feels like a cultural compression of many floods into one grand narrative, a way of saying the rivers have ended worlds before, and they can do it again. Historians still argue whether these flood narratives originate primarily from specific historical flood catastrophes that became mythologized, or whether they are broader cosmological stories about cyclical destruction and renewal, shaped by the lived reality of riverine life. Standing here, you do not feel the need to pick one. Your senses already know the rivers are capable of myth. A wall of water does not need to cover the whole globe to feel like the end of everything you love. Outside the chamber, the air is humid from the earlier rain, and it makes the flood story feel closer, like the atmosphere itself is leaning in. You step into a courtyard where water is still puddled in low spots, reflecting the sky in broken mirrors. A child is poking at a puddle with a stick, and the small ripples spread outward. It is innocent, but it makes your skin prickle, because you are thinking about ripples becoming waves becoming walls. You imagine the flood scene as the ancient listener might, not as a cinematic spectacle, but as a moral weather report. Enlil's law has consequences. When humans disrupt the balance, the sky can decide to reset. That is terrifying. But it also makes the world feel coherent. If disaster has a reason, then you can prevent it by living correctly. That belief can keep communities disciplined. It can also crush them with guilt when disaster happens anyway. You wander along the edge of the temple precinct and see workers reinforcing a low wall near a channel. They are stacking mud and reeds, patching weak points. This is what flood myth looks like on the ground. Maintenance, a constant attempt to stay ahead of water. You watch a man press wet clay into a crack with his hands, and you think about the human in the flood story, pressing pitch into boat seams. Myth and labor mirror each other. A priest approaches the workers, speaking to them, not scolding, but urging speed. The priest's presence makes the work feel sanctioned, like the temple itself is participating in flood prevention. That is another layer of Enlil's law. The temple does not just interpret disaster. It also organizes response. In a world without modern disaster agencies, the temple can be a coordination center, a place where resources are stored and labor is mobilized. Religion and infrastructure are braided together. Quirky detail number 2. Because it is too good to leave behind, in some versions of the broader Mesopotamian tradition, the gods regret the flood afterward, disturbed by the silence and the loss of offerings. Because gods, apparently, enjoy snacks and attention. There is a moment where the surviving human offers sacrifice, and the gods gather around it. The imagery is vivid, almost awkward, like divine beings hovering around barbecue smoke because they missed dinner. You do not dwell on it too hard because, yes, it can sound strange, but it reveals something deeply human in the myth. Even cosmic authority can miscalculate. Even law can go too far. Historians still argue whether that divine regret theme is primarily theological, showing that gods are not omniscient and that order requires negotiation, or whether it reflects a social critique, a way of saying that powerful authorities can cause catastrophic harm and only realize afterward what they have done. You stand in Nippur, under Enlil's shadow, and you let that thought sit. If the sky's law can be harsh, then maybe the myth is also a warning to kings and priests. Do not let your love of order become cruelty. The Enlil versus Enki tension sharpens in your mind into a question. What is justice if it destroys everyone? If humans are noisy, do you drown them, or do you set boundaries? Enlil's style is decisive. Enki's style is corrective. The flood story makes the argument dramatic enough that you cannot ignore it. You walk toward a quieter corner of the precinct where a small shrine stands. Simple, half-sheltered. Someone has placed a handful of reeds there, tied together like a tiny raft. Maybe it is a personal offering. Maybe it is a symbolic plea. Let me float. Let my life stay above disaster. You feel the softness in your chest again, because behind all the epic imagery, flood myths are about the fear of losing everything. A breeze moves through, and you hear the distant sound of water rushing in a channel, louder than before. It might be normal flow. It might be a temporary surge after rain. But with the flood story in your ears, every water sound becomes loaded. This is how myth works. It trains your attention. It turns the environment into a narrative. You find yourself looking up at the temple terraces again, at the manufactured mountain of the Eker, and you think, if a flood comes, height is survival. No wonder sacred architecture loves elevation. No wonder people dream of boats. No wonder Enlil's law feels so big. Because the environment here demands big stories, a simple explanation is not enough when the river can erase your name. The courtyard grows quieter as people retreat indoors, and you feel the story settling into you like damp into clay. The flood memory is not finished, not in your mind, not in the culture. It will echo into law, into offerings, into how kings justify power, into how priests interpret storms. And as you turn to continue, you sense that the next thing you will learn is how people try to bargain with that memory in daily life, how they convert fear into offerings, omens, and economics, how they make the flood story a tool for stability. Because after you've heard about the water that can wipe the world, you start paying close attention to whatever might keep the sky in a good mood. You keep walking with the flood story still clinging to your thoughts like damp cloth. Everything looks the same, but it feels different, as if the city has quietly added a second layer of meaning over every jar, every channel, every roof line. A puddle is not just a puddle anymore. It is a reminder. A gust of wind is not just air, it is a mood. And when a civilization lives with that kind of sensitivity, it becomes very good at turning fear into systems. You drift into a part of Nipper that smells strongly of grain and oil. Storerooms sit like fat, quiet animals behind thick doors. Workers carry baskets and jars in and out, recording quantities with the help of temple scribes. A temple official stands near an entrance, checking seals, nodding at some deliveries, frowning at others. You can feel the economy breathing here, steady and controlled. And you realize this is where Enlil's law becomes a financial instrument, mainstream historical fact, laid down carefully. In Mesopotamian city-states, temples often function as major economic institutions, holding land, organizing labor, storing surplus goods, and redistributing rations. Offerings to gods and resources managed by temple administrations intertwine with the broader economy, and records on clay tablets track these transactions in detail. The temple is not just a sacred building. It is a warehouse, an employer, and a bank, all wrapped in incense. You watch a man deliver a jar of oil, and a scribe presses marks into clay to record it. The man looks relieved when the tablet is sealed, like his responsibility has been transferred into official memory. That's one of the quiet powers of writing. It turns private anxiety into public record. If someone later accuses him of shorting the temple, he can point to the tablet and say, "Look, the clay remembers." It is comforting in a world where the river can erase footprints overnight. But there is another kind of memory here too. The gods' memory. People do not only fear human penalties. They fear divine ones. They fear that if they neglect offerings, the sky will notice. This is where blessing and curse become economic forces. If Enlil grants prosperity, then investing in Enlil's favor is as logical as investing in irrigation. You do not pay the temple only because the priests demand it. You pay because it feels like insurance, quirky tidbit, the kind that makes you smile and squint. Mesopotamian people sometimes carried small protective objects, recited short incantations, or used ritual figurines and symbolic acts to ward off misfortune. Some of these practices can look like magic from a modern lens, but in their world it is simply another technology for managing risk. Imagine buying a tiny clay demon trap and thinking, "Great, my spiritual home security system is installed." Honestly? Relatable. You pass a small store where a woman sells bread and dried dates. A customer haggles, and the exchange is ordinary, until the woman casually mentions a blessing. She says something like, "May Enlil keep your field safe," as if it's the equivalent of "have a nice day." The customer responds with a phrase that acknowledges the gods. The transaction is not purely secular. It's wrapped in divine language the way modern purchases are wrapped in terms and conditions you never read. The blessing is part courtesy, part superstition, part worldview. A temple official walks by and people subtly adjust their posture. You notice that the official's authority is not only social. He has access to storerooms. He can influence who gets rations, who gets hired, whose offering is accepted with a smile. The temple's economic role gives its representatives power over daily survival. And because the temple is Enlil's house, that power is framed as cosmic order, not personal dominance. That framing is incredibly effective. It turns compliance into devotion. Historians still argue whether temple redistribution systems primarily benefit the broader population by stabilizing resources and providing social safety nets, or whether they mainly consolidate wealth and control in elite hands. You can see both possibilities in the same scene. A worker receives a ration and looks grateful. Another worker looks exhausted, like he's doing temple labor because there is no other option. Order can be shelter. Order can also be a cage. You wander toward an area where omen specialists might work. And yes, that is a thing. People here do not just store grain. They store interpretations. They observe the world and try to translate it into predictions. A man stands near a wall with a small collection of objects, perhaps stones, bits of carved wood, maybe a small bowl. He speaks to someone in low tones, and you catch phrases about a dream, a bird's behavior, a strange sound in the night, mainstream fact, threaded through quietly. Divination and omen interpretation are widespread in Mesopotamian cultures, and specialists develop structured methods for reading signs in everything from celestial events to animal behavior. These practices can influence decisions about agriculture, travel, politics, and ritual. People take omens seriously because they are trying to make the future less invisible. You watch a client hand over a small offering, maybe a bit of grain or a piece of cloth. Payment for interpretation, payment for reassurance. The specialist speaks, and the client's shoulders drop slightly. It doesn't even matter if the omen is good or bad. What matters is that it is legible. Uncertainty is the real monster. Interpretation is a way to cage it. Quirky tidbit number 2, slid into your ear like gossip. Some Mesopotamian ritual traditions include apotropaic figurines, like small protective beings placed under thresholds or in walls, meant to guard a house. People sometimes buried these little guardians out of sight, as if protection works best when it's discreet. The idea of hiding your security system inside the architecture is honestly kind of genius. Also, it means your home is literally haunted by customer service staff. You move through a residential lane, and you see evidence of this worldview everywhere. A small, chalky mark on a doorframe, a bundle of reeds tied in a specific pattern, a tiny bowl left in a corner with a bit of food. These are not always grand offerings. They're micro-offerings, spiritual pocket change. People are constantly negotiating with the unseen, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, daily maintenance way. It's like watering a plant so it doesn't die. Except the plant is cosmic stability. And now, you notice how curses function too. Someone mutters a warning about what happens when you cheat or steal. The language isn't only, "the law will catch you," it's, "the gods will see." Enlil's law is not just human enforcement. It's metaphysical surveillance that makes social order stronger. If your neighbor can't see you, the sky can. And the sky has storms. Historians still argue whether this kind of divine moral oversight mainly reflects genuine religious belief, or whether it's also a culturally reinforced mechanism that reduces social conflict by discouraging wrongdoing. Again, it's both. Humans can sincerely believe and also benefit socially from the belief. The beliefs that survive are often the ones that do work. You pass near a temple distribution point where workers line up. They receive measured amounts of grain or beer. The process is orderly, recorded, overseen. The line itself feels like a ritual. People stand in place. They wait. They accept what's given. It's very much like modern bureaucracy, except the office has more sand and fewer complaint forms. You can't help thinking, Enlil really invented the queue, and you let yourself enjoy that small joke, because it keeps the heaviness from settling too deeply. A man at the front of the line speaks sharply, complaining that his ration is short. The official listens, face neutral, then gestures to a scribe. The scribe checks a tablet. The official responds with calm authority. The man grumbles but accepts. It's a small scene, but it reveals everything. Tablets create truth, officials enforce it, and the divine framework makes resistance feel like rebellion against the order itself. That's powerful. As you continue, you realize the flood story is the deep fear, but the daily system is the response. Offerings, omens, redistribution, blessing, and curse. It's a whole network designed to keep the world predictable enough to live in. Enlil's law is the idea that if you do the right things, the sky will do the right things. It's a bargain. It's also a coping strategy. You look up again. The sky's calmer now, clouds thinning into pale streaks. The air feels lighter. People's voices sound more relaxed. Someone laughs at a child chasing a chicken, and you smile because, yes, even under cosmic law, chickens still cause chaos. But you know what's coming next, because the systems you're seeing don't stay local. When foreign armies march in, when new kings take over, when empires rise, this sky law doesn't vanish. It gets adopted, repurposed, and stamped onto new regimes like a seal rolled into fresh clay. And you're about to watch that happen. You walk toward the edge of Nippur, where the streets feel less sacred and more exposed, where the temple's shadow still reaches but doesn't fully cover everything. The air is warmer now, drying the mud, and your sandals, imaginary though they are, would definitely be making that awful crusty sound. You know the one, the sound that says, "Congrats, you are now wearing the city." People move with a steadier pace again. The storm is past. The ration line is done. Life resumes. But underneath the normal rhythm, you sense a long historical tremor. This place has been claimed, reclaimed, and admired by outsiders for centuries. Because Nippur isn't just a city. It's a credential. You pause at a crossroads where traders pass with carts. You catch accents that feel slightly different, styles of dress that don't match the local pattern exactly. A man with a heavier beard speaks in a language that sounds close but not identical. And a local responds in a practiced way, like this exchange is common. You realize you're standing at a point where cultures overlap, and wherever cultures overlap, gods get negotiated too. Mainstream historical fact, carried in softly. Throughout Mesopotamian history, different political powers and empires, From Akkadian rulers to later dynasties and imperial states, interact with and often support major cult centers like Nippur to legitimize their rule. Conquering powers frequently adopt or honor local deities and temple institutions, not necessarily out of pure devotion, but because religious continuity helps stabilize governance. You imagine it like this. An empire rolls in with foreign boots and new banners, and the first smart thing it does is not to insult the sky. Instead, it bows. It offers gifts. It renovates the temple. It says, "We respect Enlil." And in doing that, it tells the people, we are not chaos, we are the new order. It's branding, but ancient and deeply serious. If Enlil is law, then aligning with Enlil makes you look lawful. You see this idea in small hints. A stone marker near a public space bears a name that isn't local Sumerian in flavor. A tablet being carried by an official uses different phrasing, perhaps reflecting Akkadian influence. You don't need to read it perfectly to feel the shift. Political language changes, but it keeps the same sacred backbone. The new regime might speak a different tongue, but it still says, "The gods support us." Because that sentence is the universal password, quirky tidbit, delivered like a sleepy whisper. In Mesopotamian practice, it isn't unusual for conquering kings to present themselves as pious restorers of temples, sometimes bragging about rebuilding sacred sites as proof of virtue. It's like showing up after someone else wrecked the house and saying, "Look, I fixed the roof, so clearly I deserve to be in charge." You can almost hear the public relations voice in the clay inscriptions, "I, the Mighty One, beloved of the great gods, repaired what was broken." Ancient flexing is still flexing. You walk past a small gathering where a storyteller or singer is reciting something, and you notice the tale uses divine names as political signposts. The narrator mentions Enlil, then mentions a king, and the crowd murmurs approval at the right moments. Stories become soft propaganda, not in a sinister way all the time, but in the way communities teach themselves who belongs and who is legitimate. If the storyteller says Enlil favors this ruler, the crowd can relax a little. If Enlil doesn't, the crowd stays tense. Historians still argue whether the adoption of local gods by foreign rulers reflects genuine syncretic belief and religious integration, or whether it is primarily a strategic political performance. Standing here, you can feel how messy the answer is. Humans are capable of sincere devotion and strategic calculation at the same time. A conqueror might genuinely fear Enlil's storms. He might also genuinely enjoy the convenience of divine endorsement. And the priests might welcome new patrons while also quietly steering them, like a temple-shaped rudder guiding a very large, very dangerous ship. You drift closer to a place where officials are inspecting goods. There is a sense of controlled movement, like the city is always managing inflow and outflow, taxes, tribute, offerings, and you realize foreign rule changes what flows, but the system of flow remains. Temples still receive goods, scribes still record them, blessings still frame them. Enlil's law provides continuity when flags change. You picture an Akkadian ruler, perhaps Sargon's era, stepping into Nippur and making offerings. Carefully. In the Akkadian period, the political center shifts, but Nippur's religious authority remains significant. Later, other dynasties and empires would do similar things, and even as other gods rise in prominence, the old sanctuaries keep their weight. The temple is a kind of anchor point. If you hold it, you can claim the tradition. A breeze picks up, and you watch dust lift and settle. You think about how empires operate like wind too. They sweep in, reshape landscapes, then move on. The temples, like stone or deep earth, remain. Enlil's law is attached to the land in a way that foreign rulers can't ignore. Quirky detail number 2. Because your brain loves it, ancient kings often leave inscriptions that read like a mix between a resume and a prayer. They list titles, victories, building projects, and then drop in lines like beloved of Enlil or chosen by the gods. It's the ancient equivalent of adding team player and hard worker to your bio. Except the team is divine and the performance review might involve lightning. You chuckle softly because it's absurd and also completely understandable. As you walk, you notice how ordinary people respond to foreign presence. They keep living, they keep offering, they keep using Enlil's name in daily blessings. This is important. The divine framework is bigger than the regime. For many, gods outlast kings. If the new ruler honors the god, fine. If not, the god is still there, and the ruler is the one who looks temporary. Historians still argue whether religious continuity in Mesopotamia acts more as a stabilizer that helps societies survive political upheaval, or whether it can also be a tool that makes people accept new rulers too easily by translating conquest into divine plan. You can feel both again. Continuity reduces panic, but it can also smooth over injustice. If every regime says, Enlil chose us, then divine choice becomes a language that can justify almost anything. You pass a small shrine where someone has placed an offering that looks foreign, a different style of pottery, maybe a different pattern of cloth. It's a tiny moment of cultural blending, almost tender. People adapt. They absorb. They make room for new symbols without discarding the old ones entirely. The sky law becomes a shared umbrella, even if everyone under it has different boots. As the sun lowers slightly, the city light turns warmer, and you feel the tempo shift toward evening routines. In the temple precinct, priests prepare for nightly duties. In the streets, families prepare meals. The systems continue, but you also sense that something else is coming in your journey. Sound, not the sound of kings making speeches, but the sound of hymns. Because if Enlil's law is to stay alive across centuries and across foreign regimes, it needs more than tablets and taxes. It needs to be sung into people's bodies, repeated until it becomes comfort. And you are about to hear those hymns not as background music, but as sleep spells that carry authority, propaganda, and reassurance all at once. You feel the city soften as evening approaches, like someone turning down the volume knob on a busy day. The sun drops lower, laying long shadows across the packed earth. Smoke from cooking fires rises in slow columns, and the air smells like barley, porridge, onions, and that faint tang of wet clay still drying from the earlier rain. People's voices settle into quieter tones. Kids stop chasing chickens, mostly because the chickens have decided they've had enough drama for one lifetime. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then remembers it's tired and gives up. You drift back toward the temple precinct, because that's where the night's rhythm begins to tighten again. Daytime religion is action and logistics. Nighttime religion is sound. You can almost feel it before you hear it, the way a crowd begins to hush before a performance. The echo stands above, the manufactured mountain, catching the last light. The wind is gentler now, sliding along terraces like a hand smoothing a blanket. A low chant begins, and you follow it the way your body follows a lullaby without asking your brain for permission. Mainstream historical fact. Woven into the dusk, hymnody and liturgical texts are important parts of Mesopotamian religious practice. Priests and temple singers perform hymns and prayers to honor deities, maintain divine favor, and reinforce the social and cosmic order. These compositions can be highly formal, carefully structured, and preserved on tablets, meaning the songs you hear are not improvisations. They are curated tradition. You arrive at a courtyard where a small group has gathered, not a big public spectacle like the king's ritual. This is more intimate, like a nightly maintenance check for the cosmos. Priests stand in a line and a singer steps forward. Voice clear, steady. The words praise Enlil's authority. His command, his word that sets things in place. Even if you can't catch every phrase, you feel the effect. Repetition turns ideas into muscle memory. When a line is sung again and again, it stops being information and becomes atmosphere. And you notice something slightly sneaky. The hymns are also education. They teach listeners who Enlil is, what he demands, and how humans should behave. This is not just devotion, it is worldview training. If Enlil is law, then hymns are the way the law is internalized. Like a bedtime story that teaches you rules without calling them rules. Quirky tidbit, drifting in on a soft grin. Some Mesopotamian liturgical traditions involve specialized performers like lamentation priests who are trained in particular styles of chanting and ritual speech. The idea of having professionals whose job is literally, please cry in the correct religious way, is both strange and oddly relatable. It's like hiring a soundtrack for your feelings. Also, you can't help thinking, if your job title is official lamenter, you're either deeply spiritual or you really needed health insurance. Ancient style. The singer's voice rises and falls, and your breathing starts to match it. The crowd shifts into a calmer posture. You feel how sound can domesticate fear. Earlier, the flood story made water feel like doom. Now, the hymn makes the sky feel like a guardian again. Even if it's a strict guardian, sound is medicine. Sound is control. You watch the faces around you. Some people look reverent. Some look exhausted. Some look like they're repeating the words because it's what you do, the way you brush your teeth even when you're not feeling poetic about dentistry. The hymn holds them all. It doesn't require a single emotion. It provides a shared rhythm, and in a fragile world, shared rhythm is stability. Historians still argue whether these hymns function primarily as expressions of genuine devotion and theological reflection, or whether they also operate as instruments of social cohesion and political ideology, reinforcing hierarchies by praising divine authority in ways that mirror royal authority. You can feel the ideology in the way Enlil is described. Supreme, unchallengeable, the source of right order. That description maps neatly onto how kings want to be perceived. But you can also feel the devotion, because people don't sing only to obey. They sing to soothe themselves. They sing to belong. A drum begins softly, or perhaps a hand clap rhythm. The sound is gentle, more heartbeat than spectacle. The chant shifts into a new section that praises the temple itself, the ikur, calling it stable, shining, protective. The building becomes a character in the song. You glance up at the terraces and feel the weirdly cozy feeling of architecture being praised like a friend. It's like singing about your house because you're grateful it's still standing. In a land where floods and storms are real threats, praising the structure that shelters the sacred makes sense. Your mind wanders to the idea of propaganda again, but it doesn't feel like a dirty word here. It feels like a survival tool. If the hymn makes you believe that the world is ordered, you sleep better. If you sleep better, you work better. If you work better, the city eats. Belief feeds labor. Labor feeds belief. It's a loop. Quirky detail number 2. Because your brain refuses to behave, you suddenly imagine Enlil as a cosmic audio engineer, adjusting the wind levels and thunder bass like, no, Bring the storm down. We're going for awe, not panic tonight. You smother a laugh, because it's ridiculous. But it also helps you feel the human side of devotion. People cope by humor. Even in sacred courtyards, the mind finds ways to stay soft. The hymn continues. And you notice how it uses sensory imagery. Wind that carries command. Thunder that confirms authority. Fertile fields that respond to divine favor. These aren't abstract concepts. They're lived experiences turned into poetic structure. When the singer praises the breath of Enlil, you feel the night breeze on your skin and your body agrees. The hymn becomes convincing because it matches your senses. You step slightly back and watch the whole scene as a system. The temple is lit by oil lamps, small flames wavering in the breeze. The shadows they cast make the walls look alive. The people gathered form a community of listeners, absorbing the same narrative. If a foreign ruler takes over, these hymns will still be sung. If a local dynasty changes, the hymns remain. They are continuity in the sound form. Historians still argue whether the preservation of such hymns on tablets suggests they were standardized to maintain orthodoxy across time and place, or whether local performance traditions allowed flexibility and variation. You suspect both, because humans love structure and improvisation in equal measure. But what matters in this moment is how the singing feels, like the temple is wrapping the city in a shared blanket of meaning. As the final lines of the hymn settle, there is a pause. The kind of pause that feels intentionally shaped, like silence is part of the music. In that silence, you hear the night, distant footsteps, a soft splash from a canal, a faint insect hum. The world sounds orderly again, not because it is perfectly safe, but because the mind has been guided into calm. The priests begin to move away, collecting objects, extinguishing some lamps, leaving others burning. The crowd disperses quietly. You stand for a moment longer, feeling the afterglow of the chant in your chest. You understand now why hymns can be called sleep spells. They don't just honor the god, they regulate the listener, but your journey keeps flowing, and you can feel the next thread tugging at you. If hymns are one way of reading the sky's law, there is another way that looks less like music and more like observation. Star watchers, priest scientists, people who look up at the night and try to turn patterns into predictions. The same urge that makes a hymn repeat also makes a scholar count. So you turn your face upward. The first stars are appearing, small and steady, and somewhere nearby, someone is already measuring their positions, as if the sky is a tablet and the stylus is a trained eye. You keep your face tilted upward as the courtyard empties, and the night sky slides into place like a dark lid settling gently on a clay pot. The last hymn is still humming in your ribs, but now a different kind of reverence takes over, quieter and more curious. Stars appear one by one, not rushing, just arriving with that calm confidence of things that have never had to prove themselves to anyone. A thin crescent moon hangs low, sharp as a clipped fingernail, and you think, wow, even the moon is doing minimalist design out here. You follow a narrow path along the edge of the temple precinct, where lamps are fewer and shadows are thicker. The air is cooler now, and it carries the scent of damp earth and faint smoke. Somewhere ahead, you hear soft murmuring that does not sound like prayer exactly. It sounds like counting. You turn a corner and find a small group gathered near a raised spot, not a grand terrace, but a practical little platform where the horizon is easier to see. A priest stands with a calm, fixed posture, eyes lifted. Beside him, a younger assistant holds a tablet and stylus, ready to capture whatever the sky says tonight. It feels like you've walked into a night shift at a cosmic observatory, except the telescope is a human face and the lab equipment is patience. Mainstream historical fact. Tucked right into the starlight, Mesopotamian scholars and temple specialists developed sophisticated traditions of astronomical observation and divination over many centuries, recording celestial phenomena and interpreting them as omens. This includes tracking the movements of the moon, planets, and stars, and creating lists and manuals that connect sky events to earthly outcomes, especially for the king and the state. In other words, the sky is not only beautiful, it is informational. You watch the priest raise a hand slowly and point. He is not pointing in excitement. He is pointing like someone indicating a line of text. The assistant leans in, and you hear a whisper of names. Not modern constellation names, but older references, objects and animals and gods, patterns stitched into memory. The assistant presses signs into clay with careful, practiced force. The sound is tiny, but in this quiet, it feels loud. Tap, tap, tap. The universe is being documented again. This is where Enlil's law of the sky becomes almost literal. It is not only that the sky commands, it is that the sky can be read, archived, compared. If a strange halo appears around the moon, it matters. If a planet brightens unusually, it matters. If an eclipse occurs, the whole city's nervous system tightens. Because an eclipse is not just a shadow, it is the sky doing something dramatic without warning, like a manager calling an unexpected meeting. You can practically hear everyone thinking, "What did we do?" A second priest joins them carrying a small object, perhaps a measuring tool, perhaps a simple sighting device, maybe just a staff used to align the gaze. The methods can look simple, but the discipline behind them is intense. They observe night after night, building a mental library of patterns. Your modern brain wants to call it science. Their world calls it scholarship and omencraft, and it lives comfortably beside prayer. Quirky tidbit time, with a small sleepy grin. In later Mesopotamian traditions, there are omen series that connect very specific sky events to very specific predictions. The logic can feel hilariously overconfident. Like, if a certain star flickers and a dog sneezes, the king will have a bad week. You almost laugh. But then you remember the modern world also has people who think their horoscope is a legal document, and suddenly you feel less smug. Humans love patterns. Humans love being told what comes next. You sit quietly at the edge, careful not to interrupt. The priests do not look at you, not because you are invisible, but because they are focused on something bigger than one person. That focus has its own kind of power. It is the power of attention, sustained and trained. The sky becomes a text, and they are its readers. You notice how the tone differs from the hymn. The hymn wraps meaning around you. This work pulls meaning down from above and pins it to clay. The assistant's tablet fills with signs. The priest nods once, as if confirming a reading. You sense the tension beneath their calm. Because if tonight's sky indicates danger, it is not just an academic note. It becomes a recommendation. Increase offerings. Purify the temple. Warn the king. Delay a campaign. Move grain stores. The line between observation and policy is thin. Historians still argue whether early Mesopotamian astral practices should be understood primarily as divinatory religion, or whether they also represent a foundational step towards systematic astronomy through repeated observation, record-keeping, and pattern recognition. You can feel the debate in your own chest. The priests are not separating natural from supernatural the way a modern textbook might. They are building a practical toolkit for navigating uncertainty. If you can anticipate seasonal cycles, you can plan agriculture. If you can notice a planet's regular return, you can predict it. And even if you attach omen meaning to it, the act of tracking still trains the mind into precision. A faint breeze slides across the platform, and you think about Enlil again. Enlil is air, storm, authority, decree. But here, he is also the sky as a governed space, the canopy under which law is written in light. When a priest says the sky is orderly, he is not speaking metaphorically. He is describing what he sees, cycles, rhythms, returns. The sky repeats. The sky can be learned. That learnability becomes part of Enlil's identity, because the order up there mirrors the order people crave down here. You glance toward the city below. Nipper is quieter now, lamps like scattered fireflies. Somewhere, a late worker walks, and the sound of his sandals is faint. Above him, the same stars watch. The thought is strange and soothing. The sky is shared. Even if your life is small, the assistant pauses and wets the stylus tip slightly, then resumes. You catch a word that sounds like eclipse in concept, and your stomach tightens. The priest murmurs a short phrase that sounds like precaution. You imagine what an eclipse means here, not a cute photo opportunity. An eclipse is the sky blinking. It can be interpreted as a warning for the king, a sign of instability, a moment when normal order is interrupted. People might perform substitute king rituals in later times, placing a temporary stand-in to absorb bad fate, then removing him afterward. Because yes, humans will invent the wildest bureaucratic workaround if it means dodging cosmic consequences. That is your first joke of the night. But it is also, in some traditions, a real strategy. Reality is always making the jokes for you. You watch the priests finish their note-taking and speak softly to each other. One gestures toward the temple interior, the direction of authority. The other nods, and you sense a message will travel soon. Not shouted, not dramatic, but delivered in the calm voice of a system that has been doing this for a long time. The sky has been observed. The sky has been interpreted. Adjust accordingly. Your mind wanders into the fringe corridor again, because the night sky invites it. You can almost hear modern voices insisting that ancient star-watching proves secret technologies or alien instructions, that Enlil's law of the sky was a literal rule book handed down from above by beings who came from somewhere else. You let the idea float for a moment, not mocking it, just holding it. It is a contemporary myth trying to graft itself onto an ancient one. The real wonder, though, is already here. Humans with no modern instruments still map the heavens with obsessive care, turning flickers of light into organized knowledge. That does not need aliens to be impressive. It needs sleepless dedication and a lot of clay. The priests begin to pack up. The assistant gently cradles the tablet, as if it is fragile, which it is, but also because it holds a piece of the night. They step down from the platform and move toward the temple corridors, shadows swallowing them one by one. You remain for a moment longer, staring at the star. The breeze cools your cheeks. Your eyelids feel heavier. You realize this, Urbanus too, is part of the system. Hymns calm you, stars steady you, and Enlil's law becomes not only something to obey, but something to rest inside. You turn to follow them, because the next place your journey leads is not up at the sky, but back into the stories people tell about it. Stories that grow darker at the edges, where the Anunnaki become more than a council and start becoming a modern obsession, where fringe lore tries to climb onto the temple's shoulders and whisper, what if it was all something else? You feel the pull of that shadowed curiosity, and you walk toward it, the night air behind you still humming with quiet, measured order. You slip back into the temple corridors behind the star watchers, and the night feels thicker here, like the walls are holding on to every whispered interpretation the sky ever inspired. Oil lamps burn low, their flames bending whenever the breeze sneaks through a crack. And you keep thinking about how Enlil's law can be sung, counted, and recorded, all in the same evening. The hymn calms the heart. The stars discipline the mind. But there is a third thing that always arrives after people stare at the sky for long enough. Imagination with teeth. You notice it first in the way a young assistant tells a story to another very quietly. Like he is afraid the walls might repeat it. He mentions the divine assembly, the great gods who decide things, the ones who sit above kings like kings sit above farmers. He says Anunnaki with a careful tone. Not reverent exactly, more like respectful awareness. In the older sense, the Anunnaki are a group of major deities in Mesopotamian tradition, often framed as an assembly that participates in cosmic decisions. They are not just background characters. They are the committee, the council, the divine crowd behind the big names. Mainstream historical fact. Set down gently in the dark. Mesopotamian myths frequently describe councils or assemblies of gods who debate, decree, and assign destinies. And the Anunnaki appear in various texts as important divine figures associated with these larger structures of authority. The idea of a divine assembly parallels human governance, with kings, elders, and institutions, which helps explain why stories about gods often feel like stories about politics. You follow the whisper deeper into a small side chamber where a handful of workers are resting, sharing water and low conversation. This is not an official ritual space. It feels like a backstage corner where the mind is allowed to wander. Someone mentions an old tale about how the gods set boundaries for the world, how they assign roles, how they enforce order. Another person adds a detail that sounds half remembered, half improvised. That is how oral culture breathes. A myth is never just a fixed text. It is a living thing that changes slightly each time it passes through a mouth. And you realize something. Enlil's law creates hunger for explanations. If the sky has authority, people want to know who else is up there with him, who supports him, who checks him, who argues with him. Enlil is the commanding voice. But a voice is more believable when you imagine it coming from a room full of listeners. The Anunnaki become that room. Quirky tidbit. The kind that makes you lean in. In some traditions, groups of gods like the Anunnaki and other divine categories can have shifting roles across different periods and texts, sometimes linked to the underworld, sometimes to high divine authority, sometimes to both. It is as if the mythology itself is doing administrative reorganization. You can almost picture a celestial memo, effective immediately. Your department has been moved to a different realm. That is your first small joke. But also a reminder that ancient religion is not a single frozen system. It evolves like language. The conversation in the chamber starts to drift toward darker, stranger edges. Not scary, just uncanny. One worker mentions that the gods can write fate. Another says fate is like a tablet, fixed once impressed. Someone laughs softly, saying, "Then don't annoy the one holding the stylus." That earns a few tired smiles. Because it is funny, and because it is survival advice. Then your mind does what modern minds love to do. It bridges the ancient to the present. Because the word Anunnaki does not stay parked in antiquity. In modern times, especially in fringe circles. Anunnaki becomes a magnet for theories that claim these beings were not gods, but extraterrestrials who engineered humans, built ancient civilizations, and imposed a literal law of the sky as technology and control. You let that thought enter the room like a draft under a door. Here is the thing you can feel without arguing with anyone. Modern fringe lore often treats ancient myths as coded history. reading metaphors as technical descriptions and divine authority as alien governance. It is a pattern, not unique to the Anunnaki. Humans look at the past and ask, how could they do this? How could they build that? How could they imagine such complex gods? And sometimes the easiest answer is, they had help from above. It is a tempting answer because it turns mystery into a single dramatic solution. Historians still argue whether the prominence of divine assemblies in Mesopotamian myth is best understood as a reflection of actual political institutions and city-state councils, or whether it is more about theological needs, a way to explain why the world feels governed by forces that sometimes conflict. You sense the truth of the debate in your body. A council explains contradiction. If the world is orderly, but also chaotic, then maybe the gods are arguing. If the king is powerful, but still limited, then maybe the gods have checks and balances. It makes emotional sense. You step back out of the side chamber and walk along a corridor that leads toward a courtyard open to the night. The stars are still there, cool and steady. You think about how a priest can look at those stars and see patterns, then look at the same stars and see personalities. And then, centuries later, someone can look at those stars and see spacecraft. It is the same human act, repeated. You project structure onto the unknown, so the unknown feels less hungry. A faint breeze slides across the courtyard and you feel your eyelids droop. But your curiosity keeps you awake. You imagine the ancient perspective first. If Enlil is the sky's authority, the Anunnaki are the broader architecture of divine governance. They are the reason Enlil's decrees feel official rather than arbitrary. A decree sounds stronger when you imagine it agreed upon by a room full of cosmic elders. Now you let the modern fringe version sit beside it, not as a replacement, but as a mirror. What if, a modern voice whispers, those elders were literal? What if the descent of gods was a landing? What if the laws were technology? It is a story that scratches a modern itch. The desire for the universe to be populated and purposeful. The desire for human origins to have a grand twist. The desire to feel like the sky is not just weather, but a hidden narrative. You do not have to accept it to understand why it persists. It gives people a sense of being part of something bigger, like cosmic governance is still happening and you are just not reading the right tablet. It is also, if we are being honest, extremely cinematic. People love a plot. Second joke, gentle and sleepy. You picture some ancient scribe staring at his tablet like, I swear, I wrote Divine Council, and now the future is turning it into Intergalactic Management Meeting. The scribe sighs, presses another wedge, and invents the ancient equivalent of, please stop emailing me. You smile, because humor is a bridge between worlds. You walk closer to a low wall where the temple's outer boundary meets the city's darker streets. From here, you can hear ordinary life continuing. Someone is singing softly at home. Someone is arguing about a jar lid. Somewhere, a baby cries and then quiets. The gods might be debating cosmic law, but humans are still dealing with dinner. This matters because it grounds you. The myth does not replace reality. It rides on reality. You think about what law of the sky means in this section. It means the heavens are not just observed, but interpreted as an authority structure. It means that councils, assemblies, and divine names provide a framework for explaining why things happen and why power feels legitimate. The Anunnaki, in the ancient sense, are part of that framework. The modern fringe Anunnaki are also part of that framework, in a different way, because they show how the same ancient symbols can be repurposed to answer new anxieties. Historians still argue whether modern ancient astronaut. Interpretations reveal anything meaningful about the ancient texts themselves, or whether they primarily reveal modern cultural hopes and fears projected backward. You can feel the answer leaning toward the second, but you also respect the deeper point. People keep returning to these myths because they are roomy. They can hold storms and law, kings and councils, floods and mercy, and now even spaceship fantasies. The myth is a container. Humans keep pouring new questions into it. Third joke, soft as a pillow. You imagine Enlil hearing the modern theories and responding with a gust of wind that translates roughly to, "I'm literally the air. Please stop assigning me a flight schedule." You chuckle quietly, because you can almost hear it. You turn away from the boundary wall and head back toward the temple's inner pathways. The night is deep now. The lamps are fewer. The air is calm. You can sense that the next movement of your journey is going to shift again, away from modern echoes and back into the long ancient timeline, because even a Wind King's reign can change. Gods rise, gods fade, cities trade loyalties, and a new name eventually begins to sit higher in the sky's hierarchy. For now, though, you carry the Anunnaki idea like a small stone in your pocket, a reminder that Enlil's law is never only about Enlil. It is about the structures people build around authority, whether those structures are temples, councils, star catalogs, or modern theories that refuse to let the night sky be silent. You walk on, and the temple corridors feel quieter now, as if even the walls are getting sleepy. The lamps have burned down to smaller flames, and the air carries that soft, dusty warmth of mud brick that has held heat all day and is now letting it go slowly, like a long sigh. Outside, the city is mostly settled into night. Inside, the sacred machinery keeps turning, but at a gentler speed. This is the strange part of long histories. They don't end with a bang. They fade, remix, shift weight from one name to another, the way a breeze changes direction without asking your permission. Enlil's law has felt absolute in Nippur, like the sky itself signed a contract. But even a sky law can be reinterpreted when new powers rise and new stories become fashionable. You step into a hall where a few older priests are speaking in low tones. Their voices are calm, but you catch something like concern. Not about tonight's weather, but about tomorrow's world. They mention other cities, other cult centers, other names. One name in particular slides into the conversation with careful respect. Marduk, mainstream historical fact, placed gently but clearly. Over the course of Mesopotamian history, especially as Babylon rises in prominence, the god Marduk becomes increasingly elevated within the Pantheon, notably through texts like the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, which frames Marduk as a chief deity. This does not instantly erase older gods like Enlil, but it shifts the theological and political center of gravity. Power moves, and the gods move with it. You feel that shift like a subtle change in air pressure. It's not that Enlil disappears from belief overnight. People do not throw away centuries of devotion like yesterday's bread. But emphasis changes. When Babylon becomes powerful, Babylon's god rises too, because religion and politics keep dancing together whether anyone admits it or not. You imagine Nippur hearing this news over decades, then centuries. Imagine priests here, guardians of Enlil's Ikur, watching kings from new centers send gifts and claim legitimacy. Some rulers will still honor Enlil, because ignoring Nippur is risky. But the loudest hymns begin to lean toward Marduk, the grandest myths begin to spotlight him, and Enlil, the old Wind King, starts to feel slightly inherited, like a respected elder whose authority is still real but no longer uncontested. Quirky tidbit, softly presented. In ancient polytheistic systems, it's common for gods to be re-ranked without being discarded. and sometimes divine roles get absorbed, merged, or reinterpreted. It's like the Pantheon is a living organizational chart. You can almost see someone trying to explain it. Enlil is still important, but now Marduk is the head of the department. And yes, you immediately imagine divine office politics, with Enlil muttering, "I built this place," and Marduk smiling like, "And I'm renovating it." That's your first gentle joke, and you let it float because it keeps the shift from feeling too sad. You step outside into a courtyard open to the night. The stars are steady. The wind is light. You think about how the sky itself does not change because humans promote different gods. The storms still come. The rivers still rise. The need for law and meaning remains. What changes is the story humans tell about who holds the pen. Historians still argue whether Marduk's rise should be understood primarily as political theology, an ideological reflection of Babylon's dominance, or whether it also reflects real shifts in religious devotion and theological innovation within Mesopotamian culture. You can see both again. Politics helps elevate a god, but people also need the new story to feel compelling, to make sense emotionally. If Marduk is portrayed as a champion who defeats chaos and organizes the world, that narrative can resonate deeply in a region that genuinely fears chaos, floods, and the fragility of cities. You walk along the edge of the courtyard and notice a carved symbol or decorative motif that feels slightly different from older Sumerian style. It's subtle, but you feel the cultural layering. This place is still Enlil's house, but the world around it is changing. The Icarus is like an old tree in a forest where newer trees are growing taller. Second joke. Small and sleepy. You imagine Enlil looking up at the stars and saying, "I'm literally the wind. I don't need a popularity contest." Then the wind nudges your hair like it agrees. You smile because it feels like the universe is playing along. You return to the interior corridors and past storerooms, workshops, quiet chambers. The temple's economic and ritual systems keep running. Offerings still come in. Hymns still get sung. Tablets still get pressed. Enlil's name still appears, but you sense that the tone has shifted in the wider region. In some places, Enlil becomes more distant, less central, while other gods take on roles once associated with him, like granting kingship or ordering destiny. This is how pantheons survive. They adapt, they reshuffle, they keep the structure while changing the headline. You think back to the flood story and to Enlil's harshness there. And you wonder if changing divine hierarchies also reflect changing tastes in what people want from authority. Maybe some communities prefer a god whose story includes more explicit championing, more hero energy, and less stern decree. Maybe they want a chief god who feels closer, more involved, more narratively comforting. Enlil can feel like law. Marduk can feel like victory. Both are useful, depending on what kind of reassurance you need. Historians still argue whether older cult centers like Nippur lose influence mainly because of political shifts and economic changes, or whether theological changes themselves help redirect pilgrimage, offerings, and prestige. You can feel how intertwined it is. If fewer kings feel the need to seek Enlil's sanction, fewer gifts flow. If fewer gifts flow, fewer priests can be trained. If fewer priests can be trained, fewer hymns get copied. It's a feedback loop, just like the temple economy you saw earlier, but now operating on the scale of centuries. You pause near an inner wall and let your fingers hover over the plaster in your mind. Feeling the imagined texture, you think about all the hands that have touched this place, all the breaths that have risen here, all the songs sung to Enlil across generations. Even if the wider world changes, this accumulated devotion doesn't vanish. It settles into the building like smoke into wood, You also sense the human resilience in how people keep honoring multiple gods without feeling the need to choose one like a sports team. A farmer can still fear Enlil's storms while also praising Marduk's order. A king can claim legitimacy from one and still offer to the other. The sky is big enough to hold many names, and humans are good at living with layered loyalties. Third joke, very gentle. You imagine the scribes updating their tablets like, chief deity status. Please see new appendix. Then the junior scribe sighs. Because of course there's an appendix. There's always an appendix. You chuckle quietly, because even in the ancient world, paperwork would never let anyone rest. As the night deepens, you feel your own pace slow. The narrative is moving toward its final stretch, and you can feel the shape of it. Enlil's law remains a powerful concept, even as Enlil's spotlight shifts. The sky law becomes a legacy, an inherited idea that authority is real, that order can be maintained, that the cosmos has structure. Even when different gods take the title of chief, the underlying hunger for sky-backed legitimacy persists. You step back into the open air one more time. The wind touches your face. It is softer than earlier storms, more like a whisper than a command. You think about how this is what fading looks like in myth. Not death, not disappearance, just a quiet rebalancing. The way a song changes key without stopping. And you know the last step is coming, bringing all of this inward. Not as a lecture about ancient religion, but as something you carry. Because the law of the sky is ultimately a story about how humans build order inside themselves, how they breathe with the wind, how they anchor fear in ritual, how they learn to live under vastness without going numb. So you keep walking, letting the temple's last warm stones guide you toward the final, calm movement of Enlil's long breath. You keep walking as if the temple itself is gently guiding you out, not pushing, just nudging, like a host who has been gracious all night and now wants to lock the doors without making it awkward. The corridors thin into simpler passageways. The air cools further. The lamps are fewer and dimmer, and the darkness has that friendly weight that makes your shoulders loosen. Outside, the city is mostly quiet, but not dead. You can still hear a soft cough behind a wall, a distant splash from a canal, a muted clink of pottery being set down. Life is folding itself into sleep, and you realize something that lands with a quiet thud in your chest. Enlil's law has never been only up there. The sky law is also a way of organizing what happens in here, in the soft, nervous animal part of you that wants certainty. You step into an outer courtyard and look up. The stars are steady again, like they've been holding their breath through your whole journey and now they're letting it out slowly. The wind moves lightly across your face, barely more than a touch. It does not feel like a command now. It feels like a reminder. You're under something vast. You always have been. The difference is that you can choose how to relate to it. You think back through everything you've walked through tonight. The river mist dawn, where Enlil first felt like breath turned into authority. Nippur's calm gravity, where priests translated sky into ritual. The scribes pressing law into clay, turning divine will into paperwork so reliable it could outlast empires. The king borrowing thunder, standing in public to prove his crown was not just metal and ego. The Akur itself, the mountain house built on flat land, a human-made promise that order can be reached. The storm as sermon, the flood as memory, the economic bargain of offerings and rations, the hymns that soothe, the stars that discipline, the council of gods and the way modern minds keep trying to populate the heavens with new meanings. Mainstream historical fact, set down like a final anchor. In Mesopotamian religious thought, divine authority and cosmic order are deeply intertwined with political legitimacy. ritual practice, and interpretations of natural phenomena. Major deities like Enlil become symbols of that intertwining. And even as pantheons shift over time, the cultural idea that the cosmos has an enforceable order remains influential. Now the quirky tidbit arrives like a small, strange charm in your palm. Some ancient traditions treat the world almost like a network of me, or divine decrees, powers that assign each thing its proper function, like invisible job descriptions for reality. You picture it and it makes you smile, because it's both beautiful and absurd. Imagine the wind's job description: move across plains, deliver omens, occasionally knock over someone's laundry. Honestly, the wind is doing a lot, and it never gets weekends. Historians still argue whether the idea of cosmic law in these myths is best understood as a projection of human governance onto the universe, or whether it reflects a more fundamental human perception that patterns in nature imply an underlying order. You stand in the courtyard and feel that you don't have to choose a single answer to let it comfort you. Humans look at the sky and see both pattern and personality because the sky gives us both, repeating cycles and unpredictable storms. We respond by telling stories that make both bearable. You wander toward the city's edge where the temple's influence fades into ordinary home shadows. The streets are quieter now, and the night has that soft, hollow sound of sleeping spaces. You pass a small home where a lamp still burns inside. Through the doorway you glimpse someone kneeling briefly, whispering a short prayer, not loud enough to hear. It is not dramatic. It is not heroic. It is a gentle act of alignment, like straightening a crooked picture frame before bed. You realize that's what Enlil's law does for people. It gives them a frame. Second joke. Sleepy and kind. You imagine Enlil as the strict but necessary terms of service of the universe, and Enki as the one friend who actually reads them and tells you where the loopholes are. You grin softly, because even thousands of years later, that dynamic still makes your brain relax. Authority and adaptation, rule and mercy, breath and water. A whole civilization turned that tension into mythology, and you've been walking inside it. You stop near a canal. The water is darker now, reflecting the stars in a jittery way. A ripple breaks the reflection and reforms it. You watch the pattern restore itself and feel the symbolism without trying. The world is always disturbed and always trying to return to shape. Enlil's law is not that disturbance never happens. It is that there is a belief the disturbance can be addressed, interpreted, repaired. You think about the fear embedded in the flood story. The idea that order can become so strict it turns violent. That law can be used to wipe clean instead of to guide. That's the sharp edge of Enlil. But you also think about the hymns and the temple routines, the way the community uses repetition to keep panic from taking over. That's the soft edge. Even strict gods can become comforting when people turn them into rhythm. Historians still argue whether the temple-centered systems you saw are best viewed as instruments of control or as cooperative frameworks that made complex urban life possible. You saw both. You saw a ration line that keeps workers fed. You saw an official who can deny, record, enforce. You saw how divine oversight strengthens ethics and how it can also justify power. That complexity is part of why the myths endure. They are not simple morality plays. They are maps of living under pressure. You continue walking, and the night air feels almost like the fan hum you turned on at the beginning, steady and soft. The wind brushes past your ears, and for a second you feel like the whole journey could be reduced to this simple sensation, breath moving, invisible, shaping everything without being seen. Enlil's law at its calmest. is the acceptance that unseen structures shape your life, whether those structures are social rules, natural cycles, or the quiet expectations you carry inside your own head. Third joke. As gentle as a pillow, you imagine some ancient priest looking at you and saying, "Yes, yes, the sky is law," and you replying, "Cool, but can the law please lower the humidity?" The priest stares. The sky responds with more humidity. You laugh quietly, because the universe has always been a little bit smug. You reach a spot where the city noise is almost gone, and you pause, letting your mind settle. You don't feel like you're leaving Enlil behind. You feel like you're taking the concept with you, the way you take a deep breath before sleep. The law of the sky is the idea that the world is not meaningless, that patterns can be recognized, that consequences exist, and that even when life feels chaotic, you can build small structures of order, a ritual, a schedule, a song, a promise kept. The stars above are steady. The canal below is quiet. The wind is calm. You stand there in the soft dark and let your shoulders drop one last time, letting the whole temple world fade into the background. Not forgotten, just resting. And now, you let the story slow down with you. For a long time, you simply breathe. The air moves in and out of you with that patient, ancient rhythm. You picture the eco terraces in your mind, not towering now, but gentle, like layered steps in moonlight. You picture scribes setting down their styluses, the clay tablets stacked safely, the day's worries pressed into something solid and stored away. You picture the king returning to his home, his borrowed thunder quiet for the night. You picture the priests extinguishing lamps one by one, leaving only a few flames to keep the sacred from going fully dark. Outside, the fields rest. The rivers keep moving, but softer, as if even the water is trying not to wake anyone. You let Enlil's breath become just that. Breath, not punishment, not decree, but the quiet presence of the sky above you, wide and steady. The wind touches your face again, faint and cool, and it feels like a hand smoothing your hair down, not to control you, but to comfort you. Your thoughts drift slower now, less sharp, more rounded. The night holds you like warm clay, holding a seal impression, gentle pressure, then stillness. You don't need to solve the ancient debates tonight. You don't need to decide whether gods are metaphors or forces or stories that became architecture. You can just let the old city settle into the dark behind your eyelids, and let the sky remain what it has always been, vast, unknowable, and oddly soothing when you stop trying to argue with it. Your breathing evens out, the fan hum in your room, or the imagined wind in Nippur, blends into one soft sound. The stars keep their positions, the water keeps its quiet flow, and Enlil's law, for this final moment, is simply the permission to rest under something bigger than your worries. End of script. Sweet dreams.